Chapter 658. Meg, who was studying Luna's method of educating Amy, faltered slightly upon hearing this. He turned to look at Vivian, and a hint of unease flashed through his heart. After a moment of silence, he shook his head, and said, "She didn't die. She just ran away. With another man." Vivian seemed to have understood something, and she patted Meg on the shoulder with a comforting expression. "Don't worry, you can always find another woman. You won't be able to keep a woman like her. However, I didn't think that there would be a woman in this world who could leave you. I'm suddenly very curious. What kind of woman could escape from your hands that can cook all kinds of delicious food? Or rather, what kind of miraculous man has such powerful charisma?" A curious expression appeared on Vivian's face again. Meg's face instantly darkened, and he felt as if he had suddenly become a pitiful man who had been cuckolded. Even his wife had run away with another man. "It's not as complicated as you think. I can only say that our encounter was a beautiful misunderstanding, and it has nothing to do with anyone else." Meg tried his best to appear nonchalant. "It's all right, I can understand. Any man who encounters something like this would definitely not feel good." Vivian gave him a knowing expression. Meg rolled his eyes. "What the fuck do you understand? If that's the case, then she probably won't come back, right? Or rather, if she comes back in the future, will you still forgive her?" Vivian continued to ask. "Of course I'll forgive her. After all, she's still the mother of my child." Meg had already guessed some things from Vivian's expression, and he nodded with a smile. TSK, I didn't think that you would be such a great man," Vivian said with a wistful expression. Meg gave a noncommittal smile and didn't continue to respond to Vivian's words. This girl's brain circuit was not very normal, and he could easily be led astray by her words. "Okay, I understand, Teacher Luna," Amy promised earnestly as she looked at Luna. "Good girl. Because of our Amy, the other children can go to school today and have new clothes to wear," Luna said with a gentle smile as she stroked Amy's hair. "Then, are they going to Chaos School for lessons too?" Amy's eyes lit up. Luna shook her head, and said, "I'm not sure yet. I have to ask the principal first. It would be best if I could attend classes at Chaos School. Teacher Luna, you're the best." Amy threw her arms around Luna's neck and kissed her on the cheek with a bright smile on her face. "Amy is also very obedient," Teacher Luna said with a smile as she gently touched Amy's forehead with her forehead. "Sigh, what a pity." Vivian heaved a forlorn sigh as she looked at Meg with a meaningful expression. "There are a lot of stars today," Meg murmured to himself as he looked up at the sky. "It makes sense that your wife would run away with someone else," Vivian murmured as she looked at Meg. "My wife didn't run away with someone else." Meg almost couldn't help but grumble. After watching Luna and Vivian leave in the same horse-drawn carriage, Meg pushed out his bicycle, and was just about to take Amy home when two black figures suddenly appeared in front of the bicycle. Meg narrowed his eyes as he looked at the two black figures in front of the bicycle. He shielded Amy behind him, and asked with a hint of surprise, "Why are you blocking my way, Madame Bartoli? If you like the steak today, you can try it at Amy's tomorrow." The two black figures were none other than the seductive Countess Bartoli and the black cat that had donned its black robe again. Meow. Ugly Duckling, which was lying in the basket of the bicycle, immediately woke up and meowed at the black cat. "I'm here for the steak." Camilla's voice abruptly trailed off, and she stomped her foot in annoyance. The lines that she had thought of had been led astray by Meg, and the delicious steak suddenly popped up in her mind. She cleared her throat, and said, "I'm here to warn you to stay away from Miss Gloria in the future. She's the woman I've taken a liking to." Meg raised an eyebrow as he looked at Camilla with a hint of surprise on his face. The seductive Countess Bartoli had taken a liking to a woman she had taken a liking to. There was too much information contained in that sentence, and even with Meg's comprehension ability, it still took him 3 seconds to sort it out and make his own judgment. This Countess Bartoli was most likely a lesbian, and she had taken a liking to Miss Gloria, so she had inexplicably viewed him as her #1 love rival. That was why she was blocking a bicycle and issuing a warning that looked like something that only a middle school student would do. Of course, Meg had stopped doing things like that after graduating from elementary school. Well, I'm working with Miss Gloria, so we have to communicate when it comes to work. Meg didn't know whether he should laugh or cry as he looked at Camilla. Don't think that I won't dare to do anything to you just because your steak is delicious. My title as Countess Bartoli's wife is not just for show. In my dark heart castle, there are all kinds of torture methods. If you dare to disobey me, I'll give you a taste of the whip and the dripping of wax. Camilla raised her chin slightly as she looked at Meg with a disdainful expression. What the hell is this inexplicable anticipation? Meg looked at the Countess Bartoli, and he couldn't help but imagine Camilla holding a candle and waving a whip around. Don't worry, Countess Bartoli. Miss Gloria and I are purely working together. There are no other feelings involved. I have a child, after all. Meg cast aside the strange thoughts in his mind with a righteous expression. That's true. Camilla thought for a moment before nodding slightly. Whoosh. The sound of a cloak being lifted sounded. Wow. What a big black cat. Amy, who had snuck up beside Camilla, was holding a corner of the cloak in her hand as she looked at the black cat floating in mid-air with elation on her face. Meow. The black cat faltered slightly before instantly bristling with rage. It was like a woman who had been stripped naked, and it immediately leaped into Camilla's arms as it looked at Amy with resentment in its eyes. Meow, meow. Ugly Duckling meowed excitedly in the basket as it grabbed onto the edge of the basket with its front paws as if it were about to jump out. Remember your promise. Camilla didn't care about Amy as she looked at Meg coldly. She turned around with the black cat in her arms before stopping in her tracks. I'll be visiting your restaurant tomorrow night. Get ready to receive your guests. After saying that, she walked away without looking back. Suddenly, she transformed into a cloud of black mist before transforming into a huge bat and disappearing into the horizon in the blink of an eye. It's just a meal. Can you not make it sound so erotic? Meg face-bombed. As expected, this Countess Bartoli was no ordinary person. Ugly Duckling, look at it. It can fly, but you have to pant after taking 2 steps. It's because you're too fat that you can't fly. From tomorrow onwards, your appetite will be halved. Chapter 659. Meg rode his bicycle toward the restaurant with furrowed brows as he contemplated his trip to Rodu. This trip was most likely unavoidable, so the most important thing was to increase his safety. He definitely couldn't be recognized as Alex. His opponent was too powerful, and if he were to be recognized, he wouldn't even be able to keep his life, let alone take revenge. Under the bridge in front of the door, a flock of ducks swam past. Amy sat on the back seat, and sang the song of counting ducks in her crisp voice. She was waving her arms happily, and seemed to be in a very good mood. Ugly Duckling was lying in the basket of the bicycle, rolling from left to right, and then from right to left again. Its eyes were rolled up, and it wore a forlorn expression. Father, did I sing well? Amy suddenly interrupted Meg's train of thought. Ha! Meg faltered momentarily before suddenly feeling a little apologetic. He smiled and said, yes, Amy sang very well. Father wants to hear another song. All right. Then I'll sing The Little Girl Who Picks Mushrooms. Amy nodded happily after being praised. Then, she began to sing, The Little Girl Who Picks Mushrooms, carrying a her crisp voice was a little soft and pleasant to the ear. Meg listened quietly, and temporarily cast all of his worries to the back of his mind. Spending time alone with Amy like this always gave him peace of mind very quickly. It was as if he had found a safe harbor. The bicycle stopped outside the restaurant, and Meg carried Amy and Ugly Duckling off the bicycle. He looked around at the pitch-black restaurant, and was a little perplexed as he asked, "Why aren't the lights on? Could it be that Barbara is already asleep? Is Big Sister Barbara a little piggy? Why is she sleeping so early?" Amy asked with a smile as she carried the dizzy Ugly Duckling in her arms. "Maybe." Meg smiled as he pulled out his keys to open the door. He was just about to open the door when he suddenly discovered a black shadow lying in front of the restaurant. It was a human figure. Fuck. Meg was so scared that he almost threw the door in his hand. In the dark restaurant, a figure with disheveled hair was lying face down at the entrance of the restaurant. One of his hands was pointing in the direction of the door as if to say, "The murderer it's Sister Barbara. What happened to her?" Amy crouched down with Ugly Duckling in her arms, and asked anxiously. Meg reached out and turned on the light. It was Barbara lying at the door. Her left hand was hanging by her side, and her right index finger was stretched out. She seemed to be writing something on the ground. Her face was pale and she was motionless. A murder scene. Meg was also inexplicably panicked when he saw this scene. He quickly bent down and placed his fingers on Barbara's neck artery. Her skin was slightly cold to the touch, but he could still feel a weak pulse. Only then did he heave a sigh of relief. It was good that she wasn't dead. "There's a line of words here," Amy said, pointing at Barbara's hand. Meg moved Barbara's hand slightly to the side, revealing a line of words written in black charcoal ash, "Give me beef kebabs." After turning Barbara's hand over, he discovered that there were traces of charcoal ash left on her index finger. "This girl didn't faint from hunger, did she?" Meg looked at Barbara with a perplexed expression. He had left dinner for Barbara in the incubator before he went out tonight. She seemed to be sleeping, so he wrote a note and stuck it on the kitchen door. "Then, Father, what should we do now?" Amy looked at Meg with curiosity in her eyes. "Let's wake her up first." Meg turned Barbara over before picking her up in his arms. She was 1.55 meters tall and flat-chested, so she was almost weightless in his arms, just like a small child. "System, help me scan her body and find out what's wrong with her body," Meg said to the system in his mind as he stopped in front of the door. "The host doesn't have the authority to conduct a medical diagnosis at the moment, please ascend to." The system's voice sounded. 500 copper coins per diagnosis, do you want to do it or not? Meg interrupted the system. "Do it." The system's reply wasn't pretentious in the slightest. Ding. Examination complete. 500 copper coins have been deducted. The examination report has been generated, please check it. The system's voice soon sounded again. Meg placed Barbara on a table at the side, and began to carefully read through the test report in his mind. Barbara, 15 years old, gender, female, strength, 7th tier spatial magician. Diagnosis, severe hypoglycemia. Severe anemia. Severe flat-chested. All other indicators normal. System, what the hell is this severe flat-chested illness of yours? Meg almost thought that his eyes were playing tricks on him, and couldn't help but complain. According to modern medical principles, severe flat-chested illness is also a female illness. If it can't be effectively improved, it may cause a great impact on a female's physiology and psychology, the system said righteously. You're good at bullshitting. Meg rolled his eyes, and couldn't be bothered to continue arguing with the system. Severe hypoglycemia and severe anemia, it really wasn't easy for a princess to develop such an illness. However, since the diagnosis had been completed, Meg had an idea in his heart. At least it wasn't some heart disease, cancer, or any other incurable illness. She should be fine after drinking some sugar water and replenishing her blood. Meg went into the kitchen to pour a cup of Spring of Life and added 2 spoonfuls of sugar. He then helped Barbara up and slowly fed her. After a while, Barbara's pale face visibly improved, and some color returned to her face. Her originally weak breathing also gradually quickened, and her body regained some temperature, and was no longer cold. Ugh! Where am I? Barbara slowly opened her eyes, and spoke in a weak voice. Then, her gaze fell on Meg's face, and she was momentarily stunned when she saw his face so close to hers. Barbara suddenly felt that her body had regained its senses, and then she felt a pair of warm hands on her back. Her eyes widened, and her face reddened, and she stood up from the table with a whoosh. However, her body, which had just recovered a bit of strength, swayed, and she lost her balance and fell into Meg's arms. Her hands subconsciously wrapped around Meg's neck, and her face was almost pressed against his. I said, I'm just saving you out of humanitarianism. You don't have to throw yourself into my arms like this, do you? Meg was still holding the cup in his hand, and his arms were spread open as he looked at Barbara, who had her arms around his neck, and was almost pressing her face against his. He really couldn't arouse the slightest interest in this kind of child who hadn't even started puberty. Chapter 660. Barbara raised her head to look at Meg. At this moment, she felt like dying. Not only was her body touched by a man, but her precious knees were also kneeling in front of this man. What was even more terrifying was, she actually pressed her face against this man's body, sliding from his chest all the way to his thighs. Although she was a little surprised by the tight curves of this man's body under his clothes, the heat from his body almost made her suffocate. How could something like this happen to her, Princess Barbara of the Moon Nation? How could a man touch her body? A man should be kneeling in front of her. But now, Barbara realized that she couldn't even move. Her limp body couldn't muster any strength, and her knees seemed to be nailed to the ground. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't move. She couldn't even move from such a humiliating position. This man, did he put that kind of drug in the water? The kind that makes women unable to move after drinking it, and can only be manipulated by men. But me is still next to me. This pervert. Men are all pigs indeed. Barbara's eyes widened, and she began to panic as she looked at Mag. Big sister Barbara, are you thanking Father? Amy asked curiously. Meg looked at Barbara, who had knelt in front of him, and was stunned. He didn't expect this girl to be so grateful despite her proud appearance. It was just that he wasn't used to such a way of thanking him. You don't have to be so polite. No matter what, you're still an employee of my restaurant. Meg shook his head with a smile as he pulled Barbara over to a nearby chair. He then handed a glass of water to Barbara and said, you have severe hypoglycemia and anemia, so you can't starve yourself. Otherwise, you'll faint very easily, and you could even be in danger. I've added some sugar to this water, so drink some. Hypoglycemia. Anemia. Barbara was stunned by Meg's words. Could it be that Meg knew what illness she had? And he wasn't taking advantage of her just now, but was just helping her. Low blood sugar, so you need to drink more sugar, right? Amy turned to Mag with a curious expression as she asked, if she's anemic, then wouldn't Big Sister Barbara drink blood? Even if I die, I won't drink your blood. Before Meg could say anything, Barbara had already said with a face as if she was unafraid of death. Even if you want to drink it, I can't afford it. Meg pursed his lips. He wasn't going to raise a vampire. He put the cup next to Barbara's mouth and slowly raised it. Barbara wanted to refuse, but as the cup approached her, she smelled a faint fragrance. With only a sniff, she felt much more refreshed, just like the faint fragrance in the Yangzhou fried rice. After hesitating for a while, she opened her mouth and drank it. The water was cool and refreshing, and just as Meg said, a lot of sugar had been added. It tasted sweet, but not greasy at all. After drinking a few mouthfuls of the spring of life, Barbara felt a magical power rising from her body. Her sore and weak limbs gradually regained their feeling, and her empty body seemed to be filled up all of a sudden. She suddenly had strength. "It seems that you're fine now. Do you want me to feed you?" Meg looked at Barbara's gradually improving complexion, and a smile appeared on his face. "I don't want anyone to feed me." Barbara snatched the cup. Looking at Meg, who had a gentle smile on his face, and Amy, who had a concerned expression on her face, she lowered her eyes and said to the cup, "This kind of thing is very common for me. It's no problem at all." Meg looked at Barbara, who was sipping her water with her head lowered. This proud princess seemed to be more resilient than he had imagined. Even though she was of noble birth, it seemed that she was carrying a lot on her shoulders. "With your illness, you can't starve, but I prepared dinner for you in an incubator before I went out today, and I also pasted a note on the kitchen door." "You?" Meg pointed at the door. He looked in the direction of his finger, and then looked at Barbara. He suddenly felt a little embarrassed. "You might not be able to see it." He thought the height was normal, but for Barbara, it was much higher than the top of her head. If she didn't look carefully, she might not be able to see it accurately. "Humph," Barbara continued drinking. She hated it when people called her short. If it weren't for the fact that Meg had just saved her, she would definitely make them pay the price. "Then I'll go make you something to eat. The beef kebabs need to be marinated, so I'll make steak." Meg walked toward the kitchen a little awkwardly. If news of him almost starving his employees to death got out, he would definitely be labeled as a capitalist who abused his employees. "Steak." A hint of confusion appeared on Barbara's face. This dish didn't seem to be on Mamie Restaurant's menu. Amy pulled out a chair and sat down across from Barbara, and said with a serious expression, "Father's steak is super delicious. Everyone who has tried it says it's good." "Is it better than beef kebabs?" Barbara was a little skeptical. "It's as good as beef kebabs," Amy said matter-of-factly. "Really?" Barbara's eyes lit up. She was a little expectant. Beef kebabs were the best beef she had ever eaten. "Of course it's true." Amy nodded with certainty. Meg walked into the kitchen. The steak cooking utensils were already placed on the stove. The striped grill could roast 8 steaks at the same time, which was enough for daily operations. There was an extra box of black pepper in the 32-square spice box on the stove. He opened the fridge and saw that the steaks had been sliced into thin, thick, and of exactly the same size. Even the texture was almost identical. They were already neatly arranged on plates. It was very convenient to use them at any time. Chapter 661. In the northern part of the city, within the Roth Empire's embassy in Chaos City, Charles emerged from his study, and handed a letter to his butler with a serious expression as he said, "Deliver this to His Highness using a falcon." "Yes, master." The butler accepted the letter with both hands before quickly making his way into the courtyard. Charles was just about to enter his study when the sound of hurried footsteps sounded from behind him. "Father, I have something to tell you." A tall and thin young man quickly walked into the courtyard. He had a hooked nose and a head of brown curly hair, and his complexion was a little sickly pale. However, he seemed to be in good spirits, and he quickly made his way over to Charles. "What is it, Elijah?" Charles asked with a smile. He had always doted on this second son of his who had always been frail since he was a child. "Father, after you returned to Rodu to report on your duties, will you be staying in Rodu as the ambassador of Chaos City? Elijah asked. That's right. If everything goes according to plan, I'll be staying in Rodu after this report. As such, I told your mother and sister to return to Rodu first a month ago. You'll be coming with me on this trip. Kairos nodded in response. He had mentioned this to Elijah before, so he didn't know why he was asking again. Has it been confirmed? A hint of dejection appeared on Elijah's face. With His Highness' support, I'll definitely be promoted to the next level. This is a good thing, so why are you looking so down? Kairos asked with a smile. Elijah was a little hesitant. Tell me, what's there to hide from father? Did you take a fancy to some girl tonight? Kairos chuckled as he looked at Elijah. He was only 18 years old, and his son was already a grown man. Elijah scratched his head with a sheepish expression as he said, It's that young Mistress Gloria from Family Moritan that I saw at the banquet tonight. I was thinking. If we're going to leave Chaos City in half a month, would you be able to propose marriage to her on my behalf? My son has good taste. Miss Gloria is indeed a dignified and beautiful lady. Kairos nodded with a smile. Miss Gloria had left a deep impression on everyone tonight, including him. If such a dignified and beautiful young mistress could become a member of the Earhart family, it would be a glorious thing. Although the family Moritan wasn't a powerful family, its reputation had also risen with the rise of the Aden Chamber of Commerce's status on the Norland continent. Although it still couldn't compare to the Buffett family Moritan, its wealth was still limitless. Elaine's eyes immediately lit up as she looked at Kairos with anticipation in her eyes. Kairos patted family Moritan's shoulder with a smile, and said, Just you wait. I'll go to the family Moritan in a few days to propose marriage on your behalf. Just from the aroma of the wine, the system's words before were not bragging. This wine was indeed comparable to the Romani Conti winery. And such a large barrel of wine only cost 100,000 copper coins. He had simply picked up a treasure. In his previous life, any bottle of vintage Romani Conti would be auctioned off for 100,000 copper coins. If he met someone who liked wine, there would be no limit to how much he could bid. Host, this is a serious violation of the rules. It will trigger. The system's anxious voice sounded. Don't worry, I promise not to sell this wine. Apart from cooking, I won't use it for profit. Meg curled his lips and interrupted the system's words. He raised the glass and took a sip of the wine. After entering his mouth, there was a soft strawberry taste, and he could feel the texture of the soil. The texture was strong, dense, and complex. It glided through the tongue and throat without the slightest bit of irritation. It was soft and harmonious, sweet and rich. Chapter 662. Meg had tasted many fine wines in his life, including Romani Conti, Petrus, Chateau Lafite. However, none of those wines, which were renowned for their exceptional quality and exorbitant prices, paled in comparison to the small glass of wine in his hand. The aroma of roses and all types of fruits wafted through the air, making it difficult for one to grasp, but also difficult to resist. The texture of the Pinot Noir grapes was still very clear, but there was another unique aroma mixed within. It was this aroma that immediately set this wine apart from Romani Conti, making it a completely different type of wine. After swallowing the wine, his body began to heat up slightly, perhaps due to the alcohol or some other reason. Meg felt as if he were in a winery. There were large black grapes hanging from the grape trellis, and the faint aroma of wine wafted from the wine cellar off to the side. A series of oak barrels filled with red wine were stacked together, silently awaiting tasting. After a long while, Meg slowly opened his eyes and stared at the wine glass in his hand with amazement in his eyes. In terms of texture and quality alone, this wine had completely surpassed Romani Conti. However, in terms of mellow texture, the fact that it hadn't been in the cellar for long periods of time was a small flaw, but the exceptional quality of the wine made up for that flaw. It's a bit wasteful to use wine like this to make steak, Meg murmured to himself as he put down the wine glass in his hand. If such a fine wine were to become famous, it would definitely fetch a higher price than Romanée-Conti at auctions in his past life. If anyone in his past life were to suggest using Romanée-Conti to make steak, they would most likely be beaten to death by all the wine lovers in the world. Host, using the best ingredients to make the best food is the most basic pursuit of a god of cookery. You have to put away such petty thoughts. Only then will you have a chance to become a true god of cookery. The system's excited voice sounded. Then why don't you give me a discount of 1 copper coin per serving of wine? That won't happen. Not a single copper coin less, the system replied in a stern voice. You sure are generous. Meg pursed his lips. He pulled out 3 steaks from the fridge and began to cook them. This steak came from an iron-hide bull, and Meg could basically deduce that it came from the same herd of bulls as the beef kebab. As such, there was a significant reduction in the wastage of ingredients, and the quality of the steak was superior to that of the beef being served at the banquet. The 3 sets of steak set meals were ready in no time. Meg laid out the dishes deftly. A piece of steak with black pepper sauce was placed on a blue and white porcelain plate, and the side was decorated with colorful side dishes. It was very beautiful. It smells so good. Barbara looked in the direction of the kitchen and her throat moved. The rich aroma of steak wafted out from the kitchen. Unlike the slightly pungent aroma of the roast beef kebab, this aroma was much softer, but it didn't weaken in the slightest. It was accompanied by a hint of alcohol, and it was almost intoxicating. No, I can't show that I want to eat too much. I have to maintain my dignity as a princess. Barbara thought to herself as she tried her best to retract her gaze. However, her stomach couldn't help but grumble. She had just fainted from hunger, and had regained some energy after drinking the sugar water. Now that she was stimulated by the rich aroma of the steak, she couldn't help but feel empty. All she wanted now was a large piece of steak to fill her empty stomach. Is someone's stomach growling? Amy looked around. It's it. Barbara immediately pointed at Ugly Duckling. Ugly Duckling, didn't you already eat a lot for dinner? Why is your stomach growling now? You can't do this. You're going to become a bull. Amy looked down at Ugly Duckling with a serious expression. Meow. Ugly Duckling looked at Amy with an aggrieved expression, and tried to explain. No need to explain. Run 10 laps around the restaurant first, Amy said with a serious expression as she placed Ugly Duckling on the ground. Meow. Ugly Duckling looked at Barbara with a resentful expression before reluctantly running around the restaurant. Barbara looked up at the chandelier and heaved a faint sigh of relief. She had finally managed to preserve her dignity as a princess. Grumble, her stomach growled again, and Barbara's expression changed slightly. She picked up the glass of water on the table and took a small sip, trying her best to pretend that it didn't have anything to do with her. Amy looked around curiously again. All right, the black pepper steak is here. Meg walked out of the kitchen with 3 servings of steak, and placed them in front of Barbara and Amy. He then took off his apron and sat down. There was also a steak in front of him that he hadn't tasted yet. Wow! It smells so good. And it looks so good. Amy's eyes lit up as she was drawn to the steak in front of her. Barbara heaved an internal sigh of relief, but her gaze was also quickly drawn to the steak in front of her. The entire steak was brownish-brown, and was about the size of an adult's palm. There were long lines on the steak, and there were specks of oil glistening on the surface of the steak. The thick sauce was giving off a peculiar aroma, and it made one's mouth water uncontrollably. The aroma of the beef mixed with the fragrance of the red wine wafted over, and it was almost intoxicating. In contrast to the dull and heavy color of the steak, the vegetables beside the steak were brightly colored. There were colorful chili peppers and green vegetables that looked like flowers. Such a wonderful combination instantly lit up the blue and white porcelain plate. Will a whole piece of beef really taste good? Chapter 663. Blood. 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 Barbara suddenly felt dizzy. Her body swayed, and she was about to fall to the side. What's wrong? Meg hurriedly reached out to support her shoulder. He looked at the pink steak in the middle and the red gravy hanging from it, and a strange expression appeared on his face as he asked, "Don't tell me you're scared of blood?" Barbara looked away from the steak, and took 2 deep breaths. Her expression eased slightly, and she stubbornly shook her head as she said, "I'm not scared of blood. I'm just feeling a little uncomfortable. Your steak is medium rare, and the middle is slightly pink. The red gravy isn't blood, but gravy. It won't have a strong bloody taste, and it's good for your body. If you're really scared of blood, you can swap with me." Meg withdrew his hand, and looked at Barbara. This girl's illness seemed to be a little more serious than he had expected. "No need, I'm not scared of blood." Barbara shook her head resolutely. She looked down at the steak on the plate, and picked up the small piece of beef that she had just cut. She closed her eyes and put it into her mouth. The expected situation of her mouth being full of blood and the smell of blood didn't appear. Instead, she bit into the tender beef, and the mellow aroma of wine and the tender gravy of the beef flowed out first. Coupled with the special aromatic sauce, it instantly ignited all of her taste buds. It was as if there were little fairies dancing on the tip of her tongue, and her furrowed brows couldn't help but loosen. She chewed carefully. The beef was so tender and plump. After being soaked in red wine, there wasn't the slightest bit of rank odor, and the original flavor of the beef was perfectly preserved. At this moment, a slightly sweet smell of blood wafted out from the beef. It wasn't the usual nauseating smell of blood that she usually smelled. This slightly sweet taste added another layer to the flavor of the steak, and she had an urge to lick it. Barbara felt as if she were soaking in a large bathtub. Her body was surrounded by red liquid, and the rich aroma of red wine was accompanied by a hint of blood. This strange scene made her feel so comfortable that she wanted to moan. Streams of heat flowed down his throat and into his stomach, then spread to his limbs and bones. It was as comfortable as soaking in a bathtub. And a part of it was concentrated on her chest. She didn't know how to describe the warm feeling, but it was indeed very comfortable. Barbara could clearly feel her weak body quickly regaining its strength. If the sugar soup from before was just an appetizer, then this steak would be the main course. This steak is as delicious as kebabs. Even though it's a completely different flavor, it's not inferior to roast beef kebabs in terms of taste. After swallowing a piece of beef, Barbara opened her eyes and looked at the steak in front of her with surprise. After tasting this delicious steak, Bloodline, who felt dizzy just by looking at it, suddenly felt less disgusted. Instead, she felt tempted. Without any hesitation, Barbara cut another piece of beef and put it into her mouth. The delicious taste spread wildly in her mouth, and the emptiness in her body was constantly filled. The dizziness also disappeared. What a strange feeling. It's not inferior to roast beef at all. And I don't know if it's because of the bloodline, but I feel like the blood in my body is flowing faster, as if it's being replenished. Also, there's a strange feeling in my chest. Barbara carefully sensed the changes in her body. She was completely immersed in the delicious taste, and the large piece of steak quickly disappeared. Meg shook his head with a smile. She said she didn't want it, but her body was very honest. He placed the medium-well steak in front of Amy, and also picked up a knife and fork to cut a piece of beef. The medium-well steak was cooked to perfection. The stripes on the iron plate were perfectly imprinted on the steak, making it look more artistic. The steak knife cut into the steak, and one could clearly feel the juices of the meat flowing out, mixed with the rich aroma of red wine. This is probably the most expensive black pepper steak in the world, and only 100 milliliters of red wine was poured into it when it was marinated. Meg looked at the steak on his fork, and couldn't help but praise it in his heart. Even he had never thought of using Romani Conti to make steak. As the beef entered his mouth, the taste of the black pepper took the brunt of the flavor, and his taste buds danced with joy. The other spices in the sauce neutralized much of the black pepper's irritation, leaving behind a slightly numbing texture and a strong and unique aroma. It was like a catalyst that pushed the flavors of red wine and beef toward the final fusion. The beef was very tender, and the juices of the meat and red wine flowed out of the beef, creating an indescribable taste. What an incredible flavor! This is a true top-notch steak. Meg's eyes completely lit up. He had eaten steak from many top-notch restaurants in his past life, but none of them could compare to this one. It shouldn't be too much to set the price at 1,500 copper coins, right? Meg thought to himself. The cost of ingredients for a steak like this was 300 copper coins, but Meg felt like 5,000 copper coins was already a bargain. There was no way such top-notch red wine could be sold outside, and the steak was also extremely delicious. Even though the red wine was very rich, Meg had already confirmed with the system that most of the alcohol had been used during the frying of the steak. Furthermore, the black pepper and other spices wouldn't have any special effects on children, but they would have a negative effect on women and puberty girls. As for the effects on men, the system's answer was a little ambiguous, but it guaranteed that there wouldn't be any negative effects. The restaurant was very quiet, and the only sound that could be heard was the sound of the cutlery clanking against the plates, as well as the three of them exclaiming in amazement. Meow! Ugly Duckling had finished its 10 laps, and it was squatting at Amy's feet, looking up at Amy with an expectant expression. "All right, seeing as you finished your 10 laps, I'll give you a small piece of beef." Amy looked down at Ugly Duckling as she placed a small piece of beef in her hand, and bent down to offer it to Ugly Duckling. Ugly Duckling's eyes lit up, and it placed its front paws on Amy's feet before sticking its little head out to take the piece of beef. It landed on the ground, and began chewing happily with a joyful expression on its face. Meow, meow, meow. However, not long after Ugly Duckling ate the piece of beef, its body began to sway slightly, and it began to circle around the table frantically as if it had suddenly gone mad. "Father, what's wrong with Ugly Duckling?" Amy asked with a surprised expression as she looked at Ugly Duckling, which was circling around the table. "Maybe it has a cat disease." Meg raised an eyebrow as he looked at Ugly Duckling, which had suddenly begun to circle around the table frantically, with a hint of surprise in his eyes. Thump! Ugly Duckling's head crashed into the corner of the table, and it lay on the ground with stars in its eyes, already fast asleep. Chapter 664. Commander, this is a report that we just received from Chaos City. In a campsite in a valley, a black-robed man quickly strode into the centermost tent, and handed a long bamboo tube with a seal on it to Seuss. Seuss undid the seal on the bamboo tube, and pulled out the letter within, upon which his brows gradually furrowed. All of the black-robed men in the tent immediately tensed up, and all of them turned to look at Seuss. "Pack up and set off for Chaos City tonight," Seuss said with a gloomy expression as a ball of black flame ignited. The letter and bamboo tube were burned to ashes in Seuss's hand. "Have the cheetahs discovered anything recently?" At the border of the Roth Empire, Sean was looking at a map hanging on the wall in a large military tent. "We've received some news, Your Highness, but it's all been proven to be false. We still haven't found any traces of Alex," Quinn said in a low voice. However, Bertley, who's been keeping an eye on Lewis, hasn't returned with a report this month. I've already sent people to verify it, but we don't know what the reason is for this. Louis XVI. Sean's brows furrowed as he recalled the saber-wielding knight who had followed Alex all those years ago. Bertley had always been extremely loyal to Alex. Sean turned to Quinn and said, "It's very unlikely that this person saved Alex, but if Bertley has mysteriously disappeared, then we still have to investigate this matter. Situations like this haven't happened often in recent years." "Yes." Quinn nodded in response. "Did you receive any news from Josh?" Sean asked with a curious look on his face. "According to the report from our spy in Azura, they most likely haven't found Alex yet, either. Zeus has most likely gone to Chaos City with his men, and this news was only received 10 days ago," Quinn replied. "Interesting. He was able to make the entire continent know where he was back then, and now he's able to make the entire continent not know where he is. Alex's abilities really can't be underestimated." Sean chuckled coldly. Quinn lowered his head even further, and didn't say anything. "I'm going back to Rodu to celebrate His Majesty's birthday in 15 days. Have you gathered all the things I asked you to find?" Sean's smile faded as he looked at Quinn. "Everything has been prepared. I've already ordered people to keep an eye on the pharmacists and start refining the longevity pills," Kane replied. After hesitating for a moment, he still said, "Your Highness, there's something I don't understand." "Speak," Sean said calmly. "Right now, His Highness' influence in the military is unparalleled. The 7 armies of the northern region are all battle-hardened armies, and they're all under His Highness' command. If His Majesty were to abdicate, even if he were to pass the throne to the second prince, the magic casters of the Magus Tower wouldn't be able to defend against the armies of the northern region. When that time comes, His Highness would be the king, so why would he concoct longevity pills for the king now? Furthermore, even now." Kane looked at Xiao-An with a puzzled expression. "How dare you? Is this something you can discuss?" Sean's expression turned cold as he said in a deep voice, "Please forgive me, Your Highness." Quinn immediately knelt to the ground, not daring to raise his head. "Remember, as long as the king is on the throne, the Roth Empire belongs to him. No one can take it away from him. All those who tried in the past are dead." Sean looked at Quinn with a mocking smile, and said, "Furthermore, as long as the king is still around, he'll still be the one with the greatest influence in the military. Even among the 7 armies of the northern region, at least 3 of them will change sides. Do you think we have a chance of winning this battle?" Quinn lowered his head even further. His forehead was covered in cold sweat, and he didn't dare to say anything. "You may leave. Report to me any news about Alex as soon as possible." Sean waved a dismissive hand. "Yes." Quinn rose to his feet, and quickly disappeared from the palace. "Old man, when are you going to die? Everyone is waiting for you." Sean murmured to himself as he stood in front of the map of the Roth Empire. His finger slowly moved from the northern region to Rodu, and finally landed on the word Rodu. Josh and those old geezers from the Magus Tower are also waiting. However, Crassus has left the Magus Tower, so the pressure has been halved. If I can get him to stand on my side, perhaps I should send someone to Chaos City. Beef was rich in iron elements, and medium-rare steaks were able to preserve these trace elements very well. As such, Barbara's complexion had completely returned to normal after finishing her steak. There was even a faint blush on her cheeks, and she appeared to be in good spirits. "I can't believe I finished it so quickly." Barbara looked at the empty plate in front of her, and still felt like she hadn't had her fill. Her aversion to medium-rare beef had completely disappeared in that instant, and she had even developed a good resistance to the smell of blood. She felt that even if she were to see blood again, she wouldn't be so dizzy. "Are you full?" Meg also happened to put down his cutlery, and asked Barbara. "I'm full." Barbara nodded. The entire steak had brought her an unparalleled sense of satisfaction, and at the same time, it had provided her with a huge amount of energy. She looked at Meg, and hesitated momentarily before saying, "It was very delicious." "Then go and get some rest. You still have to go to work on time tomorrow," Meg said with a smile. It was really rare to receive praise from this princess. "All right." Barbara stood up, and went straight upstairs. "Wake up, ugly duckling. Wake up." Amy squatted on the ground, and slapped Ugly Duckling's chubby face with both hands. However, Ugly Duckling still didn't react in the slightest. It was like a drunken cat. "It's probably drunk. Let's let it wake up naturally tomorrow." Meg took the plates to the kitchen, and washed them in the dishwasher before coming out to look at Amy, who was still trying to wake Ugly Duckling up. "All right, then I'll take it to bed," Amy said with a resigned expression. Then, she grabbed Ugly Duckling's tail, and dragged it upstairs. Meg looked at Ugly Duckling, who was dragged up the stairs with its face on the smooth floor, and couldn't help but shake his head with a smile. As expected, regardless of whether it was a human or a cat, one had to exercise some restraint when it came to drinking. Otherwise, it would end up in a terrible state. After taking a bath, he placed Ugly Duckling, which Amy had complained about, on a chair nearby. Meg coaxed Amy to sleep, and then lay down on the bed himself. He opened the ice cream cake experience bag, and entered the test field for the god of cookery. Ice cream cake could become an expanded product for ice cream. This world still had the concept of birthdays, so it would be a good market if he could make people develop the habit of eating birthday cakes. Meg felt that there was no better way to market this market than to present a huge cake to the king of the Roth Empire on his birthday. Meg felt like his way of thinking was becoming more and more like a businessman. Not long after Amy and Meg fell asleep, orange light suddenly appeared on Ugly Duckling's body, which was lying on its back on the soft chair. Its body was like a balloon that had been inflated, and it slowly became rounder and bigger. A pair of white wings sprouted from its back, and they flapped gently. The round orange ball slowly floated up and circled around the room. Ugly Duckling, whose eyes were still closed, suddenly sneezed. It was like a balloon that had been punctured by a needle, and it rapidly leaked air. It flew around the room, and then plunged into the little bed. Meow. Chapter 665. Dean Hater, I'm sorry to disturb you so late at night. In front of an old courtyard covered with creepers, Hill looked at Hater apologetically. How could that be? Miss Hill has always supported our research. Of course, such a small matter is not a problem. Hater hurriedly waved his hand. He looked at Hill and hesitated for a moment before saying, But, Miss Hill asked those questions just now. Does it mean that someone has already developed a steam engine? I'm not sure about this yet. If I get the exact information, I'll inform you as soon as possible. Hill said with a smile. Okay, if someone has really developed a steam engine, that's also something to be happy about. Hater nodded with a smile. Hill looked at Hater and said with some puzzlement, Dean, you've been researching and experimenting for so many years. If someone has already developed a steam engine, won't you feel sad? Why would I feel sad? We've been researching this for many years, but we haven't been able to make any breakthroughs. Mr. Mag did give us some suggestions not long ago, but we're still very far from being able to produce a usable product. If someone can produce a steam engine now, then that would be a massive breakthrough, and something worthy of celebration. Heidel shook his head with a smile. Dean, if you have any research topics in the future and need funds, you can come to me. Hill also smiled and nodded slightly. Then I'll thank Miss Hill first. Hater smiled and nodded. Then I'll take my leave first. Hill got into the carriage and the coachman drove the carriage slowly away. If someone has really developed a steam engine, it proves that our efforts over the years were not wrong. I just don't know who has developed it. When Miss Hill sends back the news, I must go and ask for advice. Hayter stood at the door and said to himself, "This is a real researcher. I hope Mr. Meg didn't use the things they've been researching for many years to fool me." Hill whispered to herself as she looked at the curtain of the carriage. Moreton Manor, in a study filled with account books on wooden shelves. Cyril looked at Geoffrey, who was being helped by the housekeeper to change his clothes. His expression was somewhat agitated as he said, "Father, that damned girl Gloria colluded with Mr. Hill at the banquet today and made family Moreton lose face. Furthermore, she made the decision to donate without permission and completely disregarded the family property. Moreover, today, she and Meg behaved indecently and protected each other. I'm afraid that they have an improper relationship. I don't think she's suitable to continue being the successor of family Moreton and the owner of the Suede textile store." "Pa!" A loud and clear slap resounded in the room. The butler held the clothes with both hands and walked out briskly, closing the door of the study on the way. Geoffrey withdrew his trembling hand, and looked at the red handprint on Cyril's face. Cyril had to lean on the desk beside him to prevent himself from falling, and he asked with a cold expression, "Do you know why I hit you?" Cyril clasped a hand over his face, and was struck by a sense of dizziness. Geoffrey had rarely hit him in his entire life, but he felt as if he had been plunged into an icy abyss upon hearing Geoffrey's words. He lowered his eyes, and didn't dare to reply. Today, the one who made family Moreton lose face wasn't Gloria, but you, a useless fellow. Instead, it was her who saved some face for family Moreton. At least they wouldn't think that our family Moreton doesn't have a successor. You're her second uncle, yet you dare to say such insulting words to her. If you're not suitable to continue as the successor, I think we should reconsider you," Geoffrey said with a cold expression. Cyril's expression changed drastically, and he immediately knelt down onto the ground. He latched onto Geoffrey's leg, and sobbed as he said, "Father, I know I was wrong. Please give me another chance. I really know I was wrong. Get lost." Geoffrey lifted his leg and kicked Cyril to the ground. His expression was cold as he said, "I started my business when I was 12 years old. I've been careful with my words and actions all along the way. That's how I built our family business. You don't think about making progress and only know how to enjoy life. You listen to slander and create trouble. Sooner or later, you'll ruin our family business. Father, I'll change. I'll definitely change. From today onwards, I'll definitely change. I'll no longer cause trouble and interact with those scoundrels. I know I was wrong, I know I was wrong." Cyril's face was pale as he crawled up. He didn't dare to hug Geoffrey's leg anymore. He knelt on the ground and slapped himself as he spoke in a tearful voice. Geoffrey looked at Cyril with a cold expression, and only after Cyril had almost slapped himself to the point where his face was swollen did he say in a cold voice, "You'd better remember what I said today. If I hear that you're messing around again and sullying the reputation of Moreton Manor, I'll kick you out of Moreton Manor." "Yes. Yes." Cyril nodded quickly and breathed a sigh of relief. "Don't be in such a hurry to be happy. This isn't over yet." Geoffrey sneered. He pulled out a thick account book from the first shelf of the bookshelf and slammed it on the table. "This is the backup account book of the operations of the few shops that you've been in charge of over the past few years. Do you think that you can fool me by changing the account book? What you don't know is that the accountant keeps 2 copies of the account book. I won't argue with you about how much money you've taken from these businesses over the years, but from today onwards, I'll take back all of these businesses, including your position as a director of the Chamber of Commerce." Carrie's blacksmith shop has been doing pretty well over the past 2 years. I'll give you 20 days to make this shop start making a profit. If the blacksmith shop has more money than the suede textiles shop in 20 days, I'll return those things to you. If the suede textiles shop has more money, then those things will belong to Gloria. Cyril's expression was a bit unsightly, but when he saw Jeffrey's expression, he gritted his teeth and nodded. Yes. Don't try to play tricks. If you can't even compare to a woman, then you don't deserve to inherit the family Moreton. Jeffrey looked at Cyril with a hint of warning in his eyes before he turned and left. Gasp. Cyril clasped a hand over his cheek as he slowly rose to his feet. He propped himself up with both hands on the table, and looked at the account book on the table with a twisted expression as he said, "Old man, you've never trusted me from the very beginning. Even that little girl, Sheer, has already inherited the Buffett family, yet you're still making me and a little girl compete for the position of successor, princess." Princess. Phyllis ran into the spacious cave and saw Irina squatting under the tree of life with her back facing the cave. She seemed to be starting a fire. Phyllis stopped and took a sniff before asking curiously, "Princess, are you burning something?" "Yes, I'm making roast chicken. Alex loved my roast chicken the most. When I find them, I've decided to make them roast chicken every day," Irina replied with a serious expression as she held a branch in her hand. Chapter 666. Of course, I think little Amy would like it as well. Irina nodded with a matter-of-fact expression. "Have you tried this roast chicken before?" Phyllis asked. "No, I don't like roast chicken, so I've been buying it all this time." Irina shook her head as she looked at the roast chicken in her hand, then at Phyllis, and a smile gradually appeared on her face. "Princess, I've already had dinner," Phyllis hurriedly said as she sensed that Irina's smile was a little dangerous. "It's all right, you can eat it as a midnight snack now. You can't eat such delicious roast chicken anywhere else." Irina looked at Phyllis with a smile as she handed the roast chicken in her hand over to her. "There's really no need for that. I'm still very full. Besides, if I eat something at night, I'll gain weight easily." Phyllis shook her head firmly as she reflexively took a few steps back. She really didn't know how to eat this roast chicken, and she didn't know how Master Alex was able to taste this delicious roast chicken. Before Phyllis had a chance to finish her sentence, a chicken drumstick had already been stuffed into her mouth. Phyllis felt as if she had bitten into a piece of charcoal with too much salt added to it. Even though it was only a single bite, it had already completely refreshed her understanding of food. This was not something that elves could stomach. Is it really that bad? Alex really liked this roast chicken back then. Irina looked at Phyllis, who was gargling with dew in her hands, and hesitated momentarily before breaking off the other chicken drumstick and taking a bite. Phyllis stood off to the side and looked on in silence. "Ugh! This is not something that elves should eat." Irina tossed the chicken drumstick out of the cave before taking a few large gulps of water from Phyllis's cup. She looked at the roast chicken in her hand with a complex expression as she said, "I didn't think that Alex would have such a strong taste. Back then, I thought that he had fallen in love with my little fresh. I think there's a very good chance that Master Alex has fallen in love with your little fresh," Phyllis said. "Bean Sprout, why did you cover your heart when you said that?" Irina looked at Phyllis suspiciously. "That's right. Your Highness, I'm here to report an important piece of news to you." Phyllis's eyes lit up, and her voice rose a few octaves. Did Snare send back news?" Irina's eyes lit up. Phyllis took 2 steps forward, lowered her body and said, "No, it's about a new batch of captured elves. They will arrive at the border of the Wind Forest in 3 days." Irina's expression immediately turned cold. She clenched her fists and said, "That old witch Helena still refuses to give up on this matter even after so many years. Since they're unwilling to come back, what right does she have to capture them with demons and orcs? Princess, are you going to make a move this time?" Phyllis looked at Irina worriedly. "We've missed it so many times before. Are we still going to sit back and do nothing this time? That's not like me." Irina chuckled coldly. "But you've only just recovered, and the elven naturalization plan was approved by Her Majesty. If you make a move, Helena most likely won't hold back any longer. If she gathers all of the major families to attack you, your situation will become even more dire," Phyllis said in an urgent manner. "This problem was no longer a problem for me 5 years ago." Irina shrugged nonchalantly as she flicked Phyllis's forehead with a smile, and said, "All right, I'm hungry. Go get me some good food." "Ouch, that hurts." Phyllis slapped a hand over her forehead as she glowered at Irina before making her way out of the cave. No one could change the princess' decision. In the past, she had thought that Master Alex would be able to change her mind, but it looked like that was impossible. Those bastards actually dared to stir up trouble and bully the elves again. Looks like they've all forgotten about my existence. Irina chuckled coldly as her gaze fell on the unroasted pheasant beside her, and a conflicted expression appeared on her face. Does Alex really like roasted pheasant? But would little AI me like to eat it? Perhaps I should make some improvements for them. The next morning, Meg turned off the alarm as soon as it rang. Meg sat up and stretched lazily. Even though he had spent most of the night making ice cream cakes in the test field for the god of cookery, he had rested very well, and his entire body was brimming with energy. He took a look at Ugly Duckling, who was hanging dangerously by the bedsheet with only one paw left, and Meg got up to give it a hand. However, right at this moment, Amy, who was still asleep, turned around, and kicked Ugly Duckling in the face with her little pink foot. Meow! Ugly Duckling let loose a cry of despair, and fell off the bed. It rolled over a couple of times before coming to a stop, and sat down on the ground with a resentful expression. Meg shook his head with a smile. This was happening almost every day, and he couldn't be bothered to deal with it. He got up and changed his clothes, and after washing up, he went downstairs to prepare the ingredients for the morning service. This morning, Meg was preparing to release steak as a new dish in the restaurant. However, Meg wasn't going to release the ice cream cake yet. Instead, he was going to save it for when he went to Rodu. This was a perfect combination of cake and ice cream. Not only could customers experience the cool sensation of the ice cream, but they could also taste the smooth texture of the cake. There was no way it wouldn't be a hit. As he prepared the ingredients, Meg thought about the meeting he was going to have with the Hill. This could be a fateful meeting. The restaurant's business was already on track, but compared to the high price of the strength points, the daily income was still a drop in the bucket. This was one of the reasons why Meg had taken the risk to create the steam engine. However, aside from the massive profits that could be reaped, Meg had an even more important consideration for the steam engine. That was how to tie the Buffett family in Chaos City together with him. He didn't want to repeat what had happened 3 years ago. As such, he had to make a change that was different from Alex's. Thus, it was undoubtedly a good way to make one of the wealthiest families and the most powerful forces in the world endorse him. "Father, look. Ugly Duckling has a pair of little wings on its back." Chapter 667. It has wings now. Meg looked at Amy, who was standing at the entrance of the kitchen with Ugly Duckling in her arms, and a hint of surprise appeared on his face. "Yes. Yes. Look, the 2 tufts of fur on its back have turned white, and they look like a pair of little wings," Amy said as she pointed at Ugly Duckling's back. Meg put down the kitchen knife in his hand, and made his way to the entrance of the kitchen. Ugly Duckling, which was in Amy's arms, still seemed to be a little sleepy, and it snuggled up against Amy's chest before closing its eyes comfortably. On its back, 2 tufts of white fur had appeared, and upon closer inspection, they really did look like a pair of little white wings. They were symmetrical on both sides, and they looked quite adorable. They do look like little wings. Meg nodded. These little white wings that had suddenly appeared on Ugly Duckling's back were indeed a little strange. Could it be that it had evolved after eating the steak with red wine the night before? I knew it wasn't a kitten, but an ugly duckling. When it grows up, it'll become a beautiful white swan. Amy said with elation. She looked down at Ugly Duckling in her arms, and licked her lips as she said, when that time comes, I'll meow. All of Ugly Duckling's fur immediately stood on end, and it looked up at Amy with a fearful expression as it shook its head. It's all right, it's all right. You're still young, so we'll talk about this when you grow up. A smile appeared on Amy's face again as she gently stroked Ugly Duckling's head. Meow. Ugly Duckling closed its eyes comfortably, and nestled in Amy's arms again. Could it be some kind of mutated demon beast? Meg reached out to touch the 2 little wings on Ugly Duckling's back. The white fur was slightly harder than the other fur, and it was arranged in layers like a bird's wings. However, there was nothing unusual about the white fur, and there were no fleshy wings either. Father, will Ugly Duckling be able to fly when it grows up? Amy asked as she looked at Meg with anticipation in her eyes. If it's really an ugly duckling, it'll be able to fly when it grows up. Meg nodded with a smile. The herb gatherers had picked up the egg from the cliff, and now, Ugly Duckling had grown some wing-like feathers on its back. Even Meg wasn't sure what it would become when it grew up. However, what was certain was that they had found a treasure. Great! Although the roast goose is delicious, I can consider riding it into the sky to play when it grows up. Amy's eyes lit up, as if she had just made a very difficult decision. That's a good idea. Meg smiled and nodded. Then Amy, go wash up first. Father will help you braid your hair later. All right. Amy nodded obediently before carrying Ugly Duckling upstairs. Did you hear? Mr. Mack had a duel with head chef Beat from Dukas Restaurant at the Aden Chamber of Commerce's banquet last night. Harrison was standing in the long line outside the restaurant, and he was drinking with a friend the night before, and he had heard something interesting. How was it? Who won? All of the customers were immediately intrigued upon hearing that. Head chef Beat was the most renowned chef in Chaos City. That goes without saying. Boss Mag won, of course. I was present at the banquet last night, and Mr. Mack completely won over the city lord, the president of the Aden Chamber of Commerce, and young Mistress Hill with a black pepper steak. A man in a lavish robe said with a smile. Mr. Mack beat head chef Beat. A commotion immediately erupted outside the restaurant. Of course, most of them were elated. It was as if something that one was most proud of had finally won the approval of the public. However, they were also a little concerned that if something like this were to become known by too many people, it would no longer belong to them. It was a very complex feeling. Steak. I don't recall seeing something like that on Amy's menu. Could it be that Mr. Mack is releasing a new dish? It must be an extremely delicious dish to be able to win the approval of the city lord and the president of the Aden Chamber of Commerce. I wonder if Mr. Mack is going to release a new dish today. All of the customers were looking forward to seeing this. The roast beef kebabs had just given everyone a pleasant surprise not too long ago, and they were all wondering what kind of surprise this new dish would bring. Boss, we heard that you beat head chef Beat last night. Is that true? Yabamiya turned to Meg with an incredulous look on her face as soon as she walked into the restaurant. The head chef of Dukas Restaurant, head chef Beat, was widely acknowledged as one of the top chefs in Chaos City. She had once viewed him as her idol, but he had lost to Meg in a chef's competition. In Yabamiya's heart, Meg also held an extremely high status, and had already surpassed head chef Beat. However, she was still unable to repress her astonishment at this outcome. Sally was also looking at Meg with a hint of surprise in her eyes. She was the first customer of Amy's, so she was well aware of the efforts that Meg had made to elevate Amy's from a small restaurant with only one dish on the menu to a restaurant that was so popular with its customers. That's right. Father cooked a super delicious steak last night, and he won. Before Meg had a chance to say anything, Amy nodded and said, "If you don't believe me, you can ask Big Sister Barbara, she also ate it." The steak was very delicious. Although it wasn't easy for her to praise others, she was still capable of being honest. "All right, I'll give you that," said Barbara as she nodded slightly. "The restaurant is going to release a new dish today. It's the black pepper steak. If you want to try it, I can make breakfast for you," Meg said with a smile. Sharing his joy made him even happier. After defeating Beat the night before, he had obtained a store, as well as a group of wealthy potential customers. This was undoubtedly going to be extremely beneficial to the development of the restaurant. "I also want to eat beef and 2 tofu puddings." Amy was the first to raise her hand. "Then I'll also get a steak. I think it'll be very delicious." Yabamiya also raised her hand. "I'll also get a steak." Sally nodded in response. I'll have it medium rare." Barbara was a little hesitant. "All right, steak and tofu pudding, what an interesting combination." Meg smiled as he made his way into the kitchen. "When is this suede going to open? I've been waiting for almost half an hour." Chapter 668. There was already a long line at the entrance of the blue suede clothing store, and the people in the line were all noblewomen dressed in splendid attire. It was as if they were going to attend a banquet, attracting the attention of passers-by. Although these noblewomen were smiling and greeting each other, the atmosphere wasn't as harmonious as it seemed. Everyone had heard that the dress that young Mistress Gloria had worn the day before was a limited edition dress. There was only one dress of each color, so there were at most a dozen or so dresses. There were already over 20 people lining up at the entrance, and the line was still getting longer and longer. No one knew who would be able to pick the most stunning dress. At this moment, everyone present was a competitor. A carriage slowly drove over from the distance. Gloria opened the curtain and walked out. When she saw the noblewomen standing at the entrance of the suede, she couldn't help but be slightly surprised. However, she quickly reacted and got out of the carriage. She smiled apologetically and said, "I didn't think that madams and young ladies would come so early. I've been neglectful." "How could that be? Miss Gloria already came very early. It's just that we were impatient and came even earlier," a noblewoman said with a smile. Her smile was very sincere. "Yes, but Miss Gloria, you said that we can order dresses today. Since there are so many of us here, can you make a few more dresses for us? At least let each of us get one," the noblewoman at the end of the line said. She looked a little nervous. She thought that she had arrived early, but she didn't expect that these people would already line up in the time it took to put on makeup. "Thank you for your understanding, but the number of dresses will be determined by the color. If there is a color that everyone likes, then it would be best. If it's a pity that there isn't any, our store has 2 other dresses that are also very good. Madams and young ladies can also try them." Gloria slightly shook her head. She had no intention of relenting on this matter. Mamie's had its own rules and principles, so it had a special place in the hearts of the customers. She wanted to make Suede into a clothing store like Mamie's, so she had to have principles and rules. Otherwise, these rich and meddlesome ladies would become the biggest trouble in the future. Gloria learned from Meg that she shouldn't spoil her guests. I see. When the madams heard this, their faces were filled with disappointment and joy. They were disappointed because they didn't think that they would be able to choose a color that they liked, while they were elated because according to Gloria, as long as they could choose a dress, there wouldn't be a second dress in Chaos City that was of the same color as hers. Being unique was what they valued the most. Madams, please come in. We'll choose the dresses according to the order of the queue, Gloria said with a smile. She knocked on the door and said a few words to the person inside. The closed door was soon opened, and a waitress with dark circles under her eyes came out to greet them. She then led them into the restaurant. In the kitchen, Meg was frying a steak with a serious expression, and the aroma of beef wafted out of the kitchen. Yabamiya took a deep sniff, and her eyes shone with concern as she said, "It smells so good, but I don't drink alcohol. If boss uses alcohol to cook steak, will I get drunk after eating it?" Ugly Duckling got drunk after just a small bite last night, Amy said as she stroked Ugly Duckling's head. Is it that bad? Yabamiya's eyes widened with a conflicted expression as she said, "My alcohol tolerance is about the same as Ugly Duckling's. If I get drunk after just one bite, then I won't be able to work later. Am I that good at drinking?" Barbara was a little skeptical. She had eaten an entire steak the night before, but she didn't feel anything at all, and had gone upstairs to sleep with a clear mind. It shouldn't be too big of a problem. Amy was fine even after eating it. Sally took a glance at Ugly Duckling, and her gaze fell on the pair of little wings on its back as she asked with a perplexed expression, "Why is there a pair of little wings on its back?" Yabamiya leaned over to take a closer look upon hearing that, and also asked with a curious expression, "Could it be that it's really going to become a swan in the future? It should be a magic beast from your world, right? I can't sense any magic power from its body, though." Barbara appraised Ugly Duckling with an appraising expression. Meow! Ugly Duckling let loose a fearful cry as it was being scrutinized by everyone, and it didn't dare to move in Amy's arms. "Here's a black pepper steak." Meg made his way out of the kitchen with a tray, and placed a portion of steak in front of everyone. "Wow, it smells so good, and it's so delicious." Yabamiya stared at the steak in front of her with amazement on her face. The entire steak was placed on a plate with a vibrant side dish, and the rich aroma wafting through the air made her salivate involuntarily. This was the perfect combination of the aroma of beef and wine, as well as a unique aroma. This aroma was like a kitten that was constantly tugging at one's heartstrings, and it made one want to explore just what kind of delicious flavor was hidden within this steak. This aroma is so special. It's even richer than the wine brewed from the spring of life that Father loves. Even those who don't like to drink won't find it repulsive in the slightest. In this dish, it's like a type of spice that adds a unique flavor to the beef. Sally closed her eyes and took a deep sniff, upon which her eyes also lit up. "I had a good sleep after eating this steak yesterday, and I feel like my body has become a little better after waking up this morning. It seems to be even more effective than roast beef kebabs. Perhaps I can test that out again today," Barbara thought to herself as she looked at the steak in front of her. "Let's eat," Meg said with a smile as he picked up Amy's steak and prepared to cut it open for her. "Father, Amy can do it herself. Teacher Luna told me that I have to do my own things, including eating," Amy said with a serious expression as she picked up her own knife and fork. She looked at Meg with a serious expression. Meg hesitated momentarily at the sight of Amy's serious expression before placing the steak back in front of Amy with a smile, and said, "All right, then Amy can eat it herself. Be careful when you use your knife and fork." Okay. Amy nodded with elation as she pressed down on the steak with her fork before carefully cutting it open with her knife. Meg sliced off a piece of beef and dipped it in the black pepper sauce before placing it into his mouth. His taste buds danced on the tip of his tongue as he tasted it. Yabamiya and Sally copied Meg and also sliced off a piece of beef before placing it into their mouths at almost the same time as Barbara. Oh! What delicious beef! Sally's eyes immediately lit up. After swallowing the beef, she felt a surge of heat surge toward her chest, which was even more incredible to her. This feeling. Could it be that this steak actually has the effect of promoting puberty? Even though I'm still young, but it really does feel hot there. Barbara's eyes also lit up. Chapter 669. The sound of cloth tearing was very clear. Or rather, it was as if something had suddenly burst through the cloth. Everyone couldn't help but look at Yabamiya, who was sitting next to them. The buttons on the chest of her cute and sexy maid costume had burst open, revealing her fair and round breasts. Oh! Her clothes burst open again. Meg's eyes lit up. Yabamiya's small body contained a big surprise, and the impact was quite strong. Sally and Barbara looked at Yabamiya's breasts, then looked down at their own bodies, and their expressions became a little complicated. They were both women, but why was she so outstanding? Oh! Yabamiya looked down at her exposed collar and froze for a moment. Her face quickly turned red, and she covered her collar with her hand. How could this be? It burst open again. Could it be that my breasts are really too big? And I feel like they're still growing. Yabamiya was so embarrassed that she didn't know what to say. The delicious taste was wreaking havoc in her mouth, and the swelling feeling in her chest was also very strong. Wow, Sister Yabamiya's little bunny is out again! Amy exclaimed. Then she looked at Sally and Barbara curiously and said, but why don't Sister Sally and Sister Barbara have any? Ahem. Sally and Barbara both coughed softly. They refused to answer such a hurtful question, and continued to eat their steaks to make the stimulating feeling more intense. Well, you'll know when you grow up, Meg said a little awkwardly. As a father, he really didn't know how to educate his daughter about this kind of thing. If only her mother was here. Is that so? Okay then. Amy nodded and didn't ask any more questions. She continued to eat her steak. Yabamiya turned sideways and quickly buttoned up her collar. Her clothes had burst open when she had eaten Rigiamo for the first time. Because she was overwhelmed by the delicious taste, she didn't think that Meg did it on purpose. Other than her blushing face, she didn't show any other expression and continued to immerse herself in the delicious beef. It's so delicious. I didn't know that beef could be made so delicious. The delicious red wine and the tender beef are perfect. The taste is completely different from that of beef kebabs, but it's not inferior to beef kebabs at all, Yabamiya said with admiration as she put down her knife and fork. She looked at Meg with admiration. After finishing the steak, Sally closed her eyes and savored the aftertaste for a while before opening her eyes, and saying, I think the flavor of this sauce is very special. It's a flavor that I've never tasted before, and it makes this steak so special. Sally. It's much better than the beef made by the best chefs in the Moon Nation, Barbara said after thinking for a while. Looks like we'll be able to sell a lot of steaks today. Meg said with a smile. He was very satisfied. For a chef, there was nothing happier and more satisfying than the recognition of the customers. Mr. Mack, I heard that you made a steak at the Aden Chamber of Commerce party last night. Is the restaurant going to release a new dish today? Harrison asked as soon as he entered the restaurant. The other customers were also looking at Meg with concern. Some of them were members of the Aden Chamber of Commerce who had seen Meg make a delicious steak last night. Yes, the restaurant is releasing a new dish today, black pepper steak. Meg nodded with a smile. It seemed that the black pepper steak had already been advertised, so there was no need for additional promotion. Then I'll eat the black pepper steak today. Harrison's eyes lit up, and he said immediately. The city lord has tasted the black pepper steak, so of course he has to try it. Of course we have to support Mr. Mac's new dish. I also want a black pepper steak. The customers also began to place orders, and many of them ordered steaks. Please wait for a moment, Meg said with a smile. He quickly walked into the kitchen and began to cook. One delicious dish after another was brought out of the kitchen and placed in front of the customers. Not long after, the aroma of beef mixed with red wine wafted out of the kitchen and instantly attracted the attention of many customers. This is the aroma of red wine mixed with beef. But it seems to be even more fragrant than it was at the banquet yesterday. David was pleasantly surprised. He had been craving Meg's steak when he saw the judges try it the night before, so he came to line up early in the morning after finding out the location of Meg's restaurant. David owned 3 furniture stores in the Aden Square, and all of them specialized in custom-made high-end furniture. He had virtually monopolized the entire high-end furniture market in Chaos City, so he naturally had a place in the Aden Chamber of Commerce as well. However, he had never liked to compete with others for positions, so he had always refused to be elected as a board member. On one hand, he wanted to make a fortune in secret, and on the other hand, he couldn't be bothered to socialize. What he liked more was to find delicious restaurants, so he could be considered a glutton. When he was young, he often had to travel far to purchase wood and all types of ingredients. He had traveled almost all over the continent, and had eaten in many places. As such, he had his own set of standards when it came to food, and no one could fool him. The cooking competition between Meg and Beat the night before had been a feast for his eyes. He didn't know much about Meg, but as a regular customer of Duca's restaurant, he knew a lot about Beat. Beat's culinary skills definitely ranked among the best in Chaos City. Even though there was still some distance between him and the top chefs in Rodu, he was already able to cook many dishes that even David was full of praise for. However, Meg was able to crush Beat with a single steak, and that was enough to demonstrate the disparity between the two of them. David didn't doubt the fairness of the judges in the slightest, and that was why he had woken up so early in the morning. In this world, delicious food was the only thing that couldn't be let down. However, even though he had woken up early in the morning, there were still many people who had arrived earlier than him in the long line outside the restaurant. Here's your pepper steak, medium well. Yabamiya placed a steak in front of David with a smile on his face before turning to the next customer. The presentation is even more exquisite than yesterday's, and this aroma isn't just a figment of my imagination, it's indeed richer than yesterday's. The difference between the two of them should be due to the red wine. David's eyes lit up at the sight of the steak in front of him, but a hint of surprise quickly appeared on his face as he said, "But the red wine that Mr. Mac used to cook the steak yesterday was borrowed from young Mistress Hill. That's the best red wine from Buffett Banks. Could there be a better red wine in this world?" David's heart was filled with bewilderment as he sliced off a piece of steak with his fork and knife. This flavor. With such ingredients and such a delicacy, if it were any other shop owner, they would be considered kind if they didn't charge 5,000 copper coins. After breakfast, Sally, Yabamiya, and Barbara cleaned up the restaurant. Meg told them that he was going to meet an important guest in the restaurant and asked Yabamiya and Sally to take Barbara out for a walk. He was the only one left in the restaurant. A lavish horse-drawn carriage stopped in front of the restaurant, and Hill got out of the carriage. She looked at Mamie's with a slightly grave expression, but a confident and elegant smile quickly appeared on her face. She made her way over to the restaurant with a sign that said, "Closed," before knocking on the door. After a short while, the door slowly opened. Meg held the door with one hand, and smiled at Hill, who was still wearing her red dress, as he said, "You're very punctual, Miss Hill." "Punctuality is a habit of mine, but aren't you going to invite me in, Mr. Meg?" "I haven't had breakfast yet." Hill also looked at Meg with a smile. "Please come in, Miss Hill, but the restaurant is already closed." Meg stepped aside to let her in. Sheer looked into Mag's eyes with a smile, and said, "If Mr. Mag is willing to cook a steak for me in the same way you would treat a friend, then I think that would be a very good start to our collaboration. Since Miss Hill didn't have breakfast because of my appointment, I will naturally make an exception and make a steak for Miss Hill. You are the last guest." Meg nodded slightly, and his gaze did not waver in the slightest. "Mr. Meg is indeed a qualified businessman." Hill looked at Meg meaningfully and slowly walked into the restaurant. "Compared to Miss Hill, I'm still a far cry." Meg let go of the door. "Miss Hill, please take a seat. I'll go get you a glass of water and make the steak." He walked toward the kitchen. "Okay." Hill nodded slightly, and her eyes looked around the restaurant. This was the first time she came to Mamie's. Last time, she was a judge, so she did not enter the restaurant. The restaurant's decor looked very comfortable. It was not extremely luxurious, but the exquisite crystal lights raised the overall style of the restaurant to another level. These murals. Hill's eyes fell on the murals on the wall, and her beautiful eyebrows wrinkled slightly. She looked at the murals on the wall and saw Meg coming out with a glass of water. Her eyebrows relaxed and she smiled. "Mr. Meg's ambition is not limited to this small restaurant, right?" "I even opened an ice cream shop." Meg nodded. Hill was slightly surprised, and immediately smiled. "Mr. Meg is indeed an interesting person. Miss Hill, please make yourself at home." Meg put the glass of water on the table beside him, turned around, and went into the restaurant to make steak for Hill. The steam engine was a big business. Although Hill was only 18 years old, she was already an experienced businessman. Chapter 671. Hill had already anticipated the delectable flavor of the steak, but she was also very confident in the wine brewed by her own winery. Not to mention Chaos City, even on the entire Norland continent, there was no winery that dared to claim that their wine was better than the Buffett wineries. Meg had used the best wine from her winery the day before, and the steak was extremely fragrant and delicious. She had thought that Meg would use some low-quality red wine as he didn't have a supplier, so the flavor of the steak would be affected. However, never would she have thought that after biting into the steak, the sweet and mellow red wine and meat juices would flow out together. The rich texture and aroma of the wine immediately intoxicated her. She wasn't a wine drinker, but she had a special fondness for the wine brewed by her own winery. She would drink at least half a glass every night before going to bed. As such, she was well aware of the characteristics of the best red wine. She had to admit that the red wine that Meg had added to the steak was even better than the best wine that she drank every night. The texture was smooth and mellow, without any astringency. Even though most of the texture and flavor had been masked by the steak, she could still sense the delectable flavor of the red wine, making the steak extremely tender and delicious. "Mr. Meg, where did you buy this red wine?" Hill couldn't help but ask Meg after swallowing a mouthful of steak. If a batch of red wine of this quality were to enter the market, it would undoubtedly have a significant impact on the Buffett winery. "Would you believe me if I told you that I brewed this wine myself, Miss Hill?" Meg asked with a smile as he looked at Hill. "I wouldn't believe it if it were someone else, but if it's Mr. Meg, then I'll believe you. After all, you're a prodigy who can cook so well, and even take the time to invent a steam engine. It's not that hard to accept that you've brewed some first-rate red wine." Hill looked at Meg with a smile, and said, "However, I wonder if I'll have a chance to taste such a wonderful red wine. Red wine is good to go with steak, but it's still morning, so it's not a good time to drink wine." Meg shook his head with a smile. "Besides, this red wine is brewed for steak, so it's not for sale. In terms of quality, it's naturally not as good as Miss Hill's Buffett winery. I can still tell what the quality is. However, Mr. Meg really separates public from private interests. He doesn't even hesitate to reject people. Hill looked at Meg with a hint of bitterness in her eyes. No man had ever rejected her so many times. He even asked her to pay for a meal. Only by having principles can you survive better, right? Meg had a smile on his face, but he was cursing in his heart. He wanted to sell it, but the system didn't allow him to. Otherwise, he could make a lot of money just by selling wine. Therefore, the existence of the system was sometimes to increase the difficulty for the host to level up. Otherwise, life would not be so difficult. What a pity. However, if Mr. Meg is willing, I'll be able to buy a bottle of red wine from you at the price of the best wine from the Buffett winery. Hill sighed in a forlorn manner, but she was also quite relieved. The Buffett winery was the Buffett winery's largest business venture aside from the bank, and it had wineries all over the entire continent. It was virtually unrivaled in the high-end red wine market. If I brew enough wine in the future, I'll be sure to reserve a bottle for you, Miss Hill. Meg nodded with a smile. The best wine from the Buffett winery was quite expensive, with prices starting at 100,000 copper coins. Hill picked up her knife and fork again before continuing to eat her steak. Aside from the difference in the quality of the red wine, even though the beef was still from the same iron-hide bull, there were still some differences in texture. The beef on this occasion tasted better, and it was more springy and tender, as if it had just been sliced from a slaughtered cow. The delicious flavor that danced on the tip of her tongue had completely awakened her sluggish body, and it was as if every single cell in her body was telling her of satisfaction and anticipation. To be able to eat such delicious food so early in the morning was going to make her feel very satisfied for the rest of the day. Hill looked at the empty plate in front of her before turning to Meg with a smile, and said, "It's so delicious that I want another helping. If you'd like more, Miss Hill." Meg turned to Hill. "I'll save it for next time. I'll be satisfied with just one helping of such delicious steak." Hill shook her head before gently wiping her lips with a handkerchief. She looked up at Meg, and the smile on her face had already faded. "Mr. Meg, you can talk to me about the steam engine now. Come with me, Miss Hill, I have something to show you." Meg removed his apron and set it aside before making his way toward the door. There was a hint of surprise in Hill's eyes, but she still got up and followed Meg out of the restaurant before entering the room next door. "What's this?" As soon as they entered the room, Hill exclaimed in surprise. In the large room that was about 100 square meters, there was a circular path paved with two long metal strips along the periphery of the room. In the corner, there was a long metal machine with small wheels that was very eye-catching. It had rough lines and a black metal shell. The first section of the machine had a smoking pipe that was erected above it, making it look like a quiet, dormant beast. The second section of the machine had two seats in front and back. Although it was a little small, it was enough to seat two adults. "This is a train. It's my first complete practical application of the steam engine. If it can be promoted on a large scale, it can change the way the world travels," Meg said with a smile. The train and track were rushed out in Mumbai over the past 2 days. Although it looked like a child's toy after being assembled, it should not be a problem for product demonstrations. In history, the emergence and application of the steam engine changed the world, and the application of the train was a very important part of it. It completely changed the way humans traveled and lasted for hundreds of years. Compared to the application of the steam engine to some kind of industrial machine, for an ambitious and insightful person like Hill, what Meg wanted to show her was something that she could not resist. Train. Such a lump of iron, without livestock or magical beasts to pull it, can it really move? I wonder if Mr. Meg can show it to me. Hill's eyes could not hide the surprise in her eyes, but she did not make a quick comment. Of course, Miss Hill can try it yourself, but the steam engine needs some time to start. Meg nodded with a smile and walked toward the steam train. He opened the lid of the boiler and began to fill it with coal. After igniting it, steam flowed into the cylinder and moved the piston. The steam locomotive also trembled slightly. Chapter 672. The steam locomotive was like an awakening magical beast. White steam billowed from the chimney of the locomotive. The steam pushed the pistons to move, and the train began to creak as it waited for its first departure. "It's really moving." The Hill's eyes lit up. The white steam made the room a little hot and humid. After hesitating for a moment, she grabbed the handle and sat down behind Meg. If the steam engine could change the world as Meg and Hader had said, then this so-called train in front of her would be the first step to changing the world. Although the Buffett Bank was still developing vigorously, she could already foresee the limits of its future. However, if she could be the first to master the steam engine and use it, then a world of infinite possibilities would open up before the Buffett family. Becoming the president of the Aden Chamber of Commerce was a small goal for her at the moment. If she seized this opportunity, then it might become something she could easily achieve in the future. Of course, the most important thing right now was whether or not the train could even move. "Although the train is very safe, Miss Hill, please sit tight," Meg reminded her warmly. His hand was holding the lever, and his heart was pounding. He wasn't an experienced driver, but since he was able to create this little train, he naturally knew how it worked. The foolproof way of operating it wasn't difficult, but the feeling of being able to push the world forward with just a push of the lever made him feel a little nervous. He couldn't predict the impact of the steam train in the world of magicians. "Since there's no other choice, then let's change the world." Meg took a deep breath and pushed the lever forward. The gears engaged, and the little train shook violently. The connecting rod connected to the pistons began to move the wheels forward, and the train began to slowly accelerate on the track. "This." The Hill's eyes widened. Her face was full of shock and disbelief. Without any external force to push it, the heavy iron car actually started to move along the track with the two people on it. Although she had been listening to Hader's reports all these years, and had some understanding of the steam engine, when she saw that the light steam could produce such a huge amount of energy that could be controlled and used, the Hill's heart was still pounding. She couldn't understand what kind of process this was, but she knew that if this energy was stable and reliable, then all the work that required strength and simple reciprocation could be replaced by the steam engine. In that case, the world would be completely changed. The Hill couldn't imagine what a huge market this would be. However, she clearly knew that this technology had to be the first to be grasped. And this would be the most powerful opportunity in the next few decades, or even centuries. Coal was completely worthless, and there was almost an endless supply of it in the wilderness of Chaos City. The speed of the little train wasn't very fast. Although the hot and humid steam was vented to the side, the room was limited, and a lot of steam still hit their faces. The experience wasn't very good, but as the first demonstration of a steam engine in this world, it was naturally enough. After circling the room once, Meg pulled back the lever, and isolated the steam and the fire source. The little train slowly came to a stop. The whole room was already shrouded in steam. Although it was hot and humid, it also had a celestial feel to it. Meg alighted from the train, and then opened the door for the Hill. He helped her out of the car. Both of their clothes and hair were wet from the hot steam, but they were a little excited at the moment, so they didn't care at all. "Mr. Meg, this is really a creative invention. You will definitely be recorded as an inventor in the history of the Norland continent." The Hill looked at Meg with undisguised admiration and praise in her eyes. "Actually, I'm just a chef," Meg said modestly. "As a top chef, you can only be described as a genius to be able to come up with such a creative invention in machinery." The Hill looked at Meg. He had brought her too many surprises, and today's steam engine locomotive had completely subverted her worldview and imagination. Meg wasn't disoriented by the praise. He looked at the Hill, and went straight to the point. It is indeed a happy thing to hear Miss Hill's praise. However, I wonder if Miss Hill is interested in this steam engine and steam engine locomotive, or do you have any intention of cooperating with me? It is indeed a very impressive thing to be able to operate a car with just coal. However, whether it can be successfully promoted and used on a large scale will still require time and continuous testing. There are quite a lot of risks involved. The Hill looked at Meg, and pondered for a while before saying, Buffett Banks can invest 10 million copper coins to buy out all of Mr. Meg's steam engine and steam engine locomotive technology, and bear all the risks. Although she was sure that this was a very strong opportunity, the Hill didn't speak too confidently. Promoting something that had never been seen in this world would require a lot of risk. If it was successful, it could go straight to the top. If it failed, it could be a total loss. As a businessman, risk control was the most basic thing. 10 million copper coins is indeed a large sum. It seems like Miss Hill also agrees that this technology will have a great impact on the existing industries in this world. Meg looked at the Hill, and shook his head. However, this is not the way I want to cooperate. I am cooperating with Miss Hill because of Buffett Bank's strong power and network. What I value is the future of this technology. The Hill's expression had already become a little solemn. After thinking for a while, she said, I wonder what kind of cooperation Mr. Meg intends to have. My expectation is to have a three-way cooperation with the City Lord's Castle and Buffett Banks. I will provide the technology, Buffett Banks will provide the funds, and the City Lord's Castle will provide the resources and protection. Together, we will develop and operate steam locomotives and steam engines. Meg reached out to hold the slightly hot steam locomotive at the side. His gaze followed the tracks, and there was a look of anticipation on his face. If you want to lay a railway network that covers the entire Norland continent and revitalize the transportation and freight of the entire world, funds and technology alone are far from enough. The Hill looked at Meg, and her eyes gradually lit up. Her gaze also became a little different. As a chef, Meg had shown a genius talent in machinery, but at the end of the day, he was still a businessman. A businessman with great foresight and a big picture view. She rarely admired others, but at this moment, she had a faint feeling of admiration for Meg. Are you sure the City Lord's Castle will be involved? The Hill asked. Chapter 673. Hill looked at Meg in silence for a while. The white mist had yet to disperse, and the man standing in front of her seemed to be shrouded in a layer of mist. She couldn't see through him for a while. Meg also quietly looked at Hill, waiting for her answer. Mr. Meg's proposal is beyond my expectations, but I do have a lot of interest in steam engines and steam locomotives. If you can cooperate with the mayor's office, it's not impossible. Shear looked at Meg with a serious expression and said, however, I have a condition. The Buffett Banks must have the right to operate the steam locomotive and the priority to use the steam engine. Otherwise, I cannot guarantee that this plan will be approved by the bank. I suggest that we discuss these conditions when the three parties have a discussion. The mayor's office shouldn't compete with you for the right to operate the business. Meg nodded and didn't directly agree. Okay, then Mr. Meg will negotiate with the mayor's office. I look forward to the day when the three parties have a discussion. Hill nodded and flicked her wet hair. She smiled charmingly and said, Mr. Meg, you chose such a closed place and made me wet. In order to ensure the confidentiality of the steam engines and steam locomotives, I had no choice but to do so. Please forgive me, Miss Hill. Meg smiled a little awkwardly. This girl was really difficult to deal with. If someone who didn't know heard this, they would think that he had done something indescribable to her. Then let's go out first. Meg raised his hand and waved. He walked in the direction of the door first. The humidity in the air was still very high. His clothes were soaked, half from sweat and the other half from steam. Meg opened the door and came out of the room with Hill. "Boss?" Sally's surprised voice sounded. Meg looked and saw that Sally and Barbara had just walked to the door. They looked at the two of them at the same time, and their expressions were a little strange. Meg and Sheer were both drenched, and their clothes were clinging tightly to their bodies. Their hair was also a little messy, and they looked a little messy. The two of them came out of the abandoned house together. Their current appearance could not help but cause one's imagination to run wild. Could it be that the boss and Miss Hill have some unspeakable secret? The Hill and Barbara could not help but think of this at the same time. "Humph, men." Barbara looked at Meg with some disdain. He was already Amy's father, but not only did he not mention Amy's mother, he was even fooling around outside. How shameless. What a pleasant and memorable private meeting, Mr. Meg. "See you next time," Hill said with a smile as he glanced at Sally and Barbara. "Okay, goodbye." Meg nodded slightly, but his face darkened a little. This girl was just saying nonsense. It was clearly a business matter, but she used the word private meeting to cause one's imagination to run wild. After watching Hill get into the luxurious horse-drawn carriage, Meg looked at Sally and Barbara with a smile. "Why did you come back? Aren't you going to stay with Mia for a while?" "If we didn't come back, we wouldn't have known that someone was secretly having a private meeting with another woman in the room next door," Barbara said with a little disdain. She especially emphasized the word private. "Looks like I'll have to report it in advance next time. Otherwise, our princess will be angry," Meg said with a smile. Why did this girl have an inexplicable sense of jealousy? He locked the door behind him and walked in the direction of the dining room. I don't care what you do." Barbara crossed her arms in front of her chest, and snorted in a tsundere manner. "Mia told us to come back and get some ingredients for making ice cream. The ice cream shop is doing too well this morning, so she's worried that there won't be enough ingredients," Sally explained to Meg. "I see. I'm going out for a while, so I'll give them to her on the way." Also, with her speed of making ice cream, even if the shop is always full, the ingredients shouldn't be too far behind. Meg nodded, and opened the door to the dining room. "All right, then we'll continue to help." Sally nodded, and turned to leave. "Big sister Sally, aren't we going in to take a look? What if he's going to mess around again?" Barbara looked at Sally with a hesitant expression. "Boss must be going to take a shower and change his clothes now. Do you want to go in and take a look?" Sally looked at Barbara with a smile. How could he do such a thing in broad daylight? "I don't want to see it." Barbara blushed, and shook her head firmly before following Sally away. "I have to discuss this with grandfather. Perhaps he'll be able to make a better judgment." In the horse-drawn carriage, Hill had already changed his clothes, and his beautiful brows were tightly furrowed as he murmured to himself. "That's a good start. Now, it's time to tell the City Lord's castle the story." Meg took a shower and changed into a clean set of clothes, and instantly felt a lot more refreshed. Although he didn't get any promises from Hill in the morning, he could tell that Hill knew the value of the steam engine and the train, and definitely wouldn't let go of this opportunity. As long as the City Lord's castle was on board, with the steam engine as the core, Meg would successfully tie Buffett Bank and Chaos City together into an interest group. As long as the core technology was in his hands, even if something like 4 years ago happened again, these two parties would have no choice but to stand on his side. This would be the foundation for him to establish himself on the Norland continent, and also one of the reasons why he would have the confidence to get rid of his enemies one by one in the future. This was the real reason why Meg was pushing for the steam engine despite the system's objections. Chapter 674. By the time Meg emerged from the city lord's castle, it was already close to noon. Due to the fact that he had pasted a leave of absence notice on his door, he changed his clothes before visiting a few detective agencies and news agencies to provide some information, as well as buy some information. As expected, I've attracted a lot of interest after making such a high-profile appearance yesterday. I can't reveal Noah Gould's name for now, but some people will most likely spread the news even further. All I have to do is wait for the young master of the Barclay family to come knocking on my door. Meg tore the piece of paper in his hand into shreds before tossing them into a nearby ditch. He then entered an alley and changed back into his own clothes. He found a random noodle shop and had a bowl of tasteless noodles before preparing to go home. Ding! System has issued a new mission. Please head to the food market and purchase the ingredients required for 3 dishes. Requirements: all of the ingredients purchased must be of the highest quality in the entire food market. If the mission is successful, 0.5 strength point will be rewarded, and if the mission is failed, 0.5 strength point will be deducted. Right at this moment, the system's voice suddenly sounded. Meg stopped in his tracks with a perplexed expression. System, aren't you a vegetable seller? Why are you suddenly asking me to buy ingredients from other places? This doesn't conform to your concept of selling vegetables. Furthermore, the quality of the ingredients in the food market is far inferior to the ones you provide. If the restaurant were to suddenly change the quality of the ingredients, the customers would definitely immediately notice. Only high-quality ingredients can create the most delicious food, and selecting high-quality ingredients is a basic skill for a chef. However, the host is clearly very lacking in this area. This mission is a supplementary mission for the trip to Rodu, so the host must master the ability to select ingredients before setting off for Rodu. During your stay in Rodu, the system will not provide you with any ingredients aside from condiments and spices, the system's serious voice sounded. I see. Meg's expression also became a little serious. He already understood the system's intentions. He had always relied on the system to provide him with the most perfect ingredients. Due to the fact that the restaurant was completely closed off from the public, even if someone were to suspect his source of ingredients, he could always find a way to evade them. However, if he were to go to Rodu to celebrate the king's birthday, there was no way that he would be able to bring his own ingredients. Instead, he would have to use ingredients provided by others. At this time, the selection of ingredients was undoubtedly a very important skill. 0.5 physique points as a reward. It's rare for the system to be so generous. In that case, I won't stand on ceremony, Meg said with a smile. He rode his bicycle in the direction of the wet market. Meg spent a silver coin to ask the guard at the entrance of the market to look after the bicycle for him. Then, he went straight into the market. The food market in the Aden Square was the largest comprehensive food market in Chaos City. Almost all of the food that could be found in Chaos City could be found in this food market. Come. A freshly killed third-grade black rock python. Beneath its rock-hard skin is tender and plump snake meat. If I miss this opportunity, I don't know when I'll be able to encounter it again. A tall beast man stood beside a skinned python and yelled loudly. The python was as thick as a bucket and hung on the rack. It was more than 10 meters long and was dripping with blood. It looked a little scary. A squirrel that's alive and kicking. It's an excellent choice whether to kill it for barbecue or raise it as a pet. There are only 3 left. One of the elves was carrying a cage in his hand. Inside the cage were 3 squirrel-like creatures that were jumping up and down. They looked quite clever and cute, attracting the attention of a few children who were standing to the side to watch. The boss ran away with his sister-in-law, so we don't have any money to pay our workers. We can only sell our first-grade magic beast mantis shrimps. 150 copper coins per caddy until they are sold out. A few dark-skinned middle-aged men were holding banners with pots of red freshwater prawns in front of them. They were shouting the slogan in tears. Meg looked at the mantis shrimps, which were comparable in size to Australian lobsters, waving their large pincers. They really do look quite naughty. However, this slogan sounded a little familiar. Be careful. The turkey is coming. At this moment, a nervous cry sounded. A turkey, which was as tall as a person, suddenly rushed out of a shop. It was burning with flames as it rushed along the passage. A bare-chested big man with a knife in his hand chased after it. He shouted to be careful, and his face was full of anxiety. The people along the way hurriedly got out of the way. The market suddenly became a mess. The turkey was a magic beast. If they were touched by it, ordinary people wouldn't be able to bear it. Meg happened to be in the passage. He looked at the turkey running wildly. Then, he looked at the old man and old woman behind him who were supporting each other. He frowned. The turkey was an ingredient for braised chicken. The first time he went out to hunt, he was almost killed by the turkey. It was very dangerous, and it was even more dangerous in this crowded market. The management of the market had already run in this direction. The passers-by were also ready to take action, but for the old couple behind Meg, it might be too slow. The fiery breath had already hit them in the face. The flamingo's body was burning with red flames, and its slightly open mouth was flashing with magma-like red liquid. Lend me a knife. Meg reached out and took a knife from the knife rack of the uncle who was selling kitchen knives, and took a step forward. The knife flashed, and Meg had already passed by the turkey. The head of the turkey flew high and then rolled to the ground. The fierce turkey rushed forward 2 steps and then fell to the ground. The flames on its body also disappeared. The chicken butcher who came with the knife breathed a long sigh of relief. If something happened, then he wouldn't be able to survive in this market. Brother, you are really skilled in killing chickens. The big man looked at Meg and gave him a thumbs up with gratitude. Practice makes perfect, practice makes perfect. Meg cupped his hands and then returned the knife to the uncle who was completely stunned. He smiled and said, "The knife is very good, thank you." "You're welcome, you're welcome." The uncle quickly shook his head. Suddenly, there was a burst of applause. Everyone looked at Meg with appreciation. Many people came forward and began to ask the price of the knife. Meg smiled and then continued to stroll in the market. Meg had been to this market several times. Every time, he was dazzled by the dazzling array of magical beast ingredients. If these things were placed on Earth, they would be protected wild animals, and their level would not be low. Chapter 675. Lake Moissac was the largest freshwater lake near Chaos City. There were all types of fish in the lake, and what was most peculiar was that there were no magic beasts around. Even for normal people, it was an extremely safe place. The Buffett family had a manor on the western outskirts of Chaos City, which was situated next to Lake Moissac. There were a few intricate small buildings situated beside the lake, surrounded by a bamboo fence. There was a large tree beside the lake. The tree was slightly slanted, and it suddenly twisted in a crooked manner toward the surface of the lake. It was like a large umbrella that was propped up beside the lake, shielding the eyes from the piercing autumn sun at noon. At this moment, there was a white-haired elderly man sitting on a small stool beneath the tree. He had a fishing rod in his hand, and was staring intently at a white buoy on the surface of the lake. "Grandfather, do you think this is worth the risk for us?" Hill stood beside the elderly man, and asked in a quiet voice. "Sure, It's about to bite, the elderly man replied in a gentle voice. The old man said softly, his hand already lightly grasping the fishing rod on the shelf at the side. The white buoy trembled, moving left and right on the surface of the water. Then, it suddenly sank down, as if it was being pulled down by something heavy. The fishing line was also pulled taut all of a sudden. It's taken the bait. An elated look appeared on Hill's face. She looked at the surface of the lake with a nervous expression, and urged, "Hurry up and pull it up, grandfather. Don't worry, this is a big fish. The bigger the fish, the more patient we have to be. Otherwise, the fishing rod and line could easily snap. Not only would we fail to catch the fish, but we'd also lose a fishing rod. That wouldn't be ideal." The elderly man gripped onto the fishing rod tightly with a smile, and began to walk the fish in an unhurried manner. "Patience." Hill faltered slightly as she looked at the large fish bobbing up and down on the surface of the lake. She suddenly didn't know if she was the big fish or the person holding the fishing rod. She had once been the one in charge, but it seemed to have disappeared with Meg. The fish that had been hooked was walked on the surface of the lake for over 10 minutes before it was slowly pulled to the shore. The elderly man scooped it up with his fishing net, and it was a large red carp that weighed over 10 kilograms. "We're in for a treat this afternoon. This is the first red carp of this size this year." Ian looked at the big carp in the net with a smile on his face. He looked up at the hill and said, "Little Hill, let's have lunch here today. Your luck has always been good. All right, since Grandpa said the fish is good, it can't be wrong." A smile appeared on Hill's face as he followed Ian to the house. In business, some money should be earned by others. Otherwise, the business will be gone sooner or later. However, it's very important who you work with. If your character isn't good, you can't work with him even if there's money to be made, Ian said with a smile as he walked. Hill nodded thoughtfully. "Can the newly brewed wine be taken out of the cellar?" Ian suddenly asked. "It'll take a few more days. I'll ask them to send it to you when it's out of the cellar." Hill looked at Ian with a puzzled expression and said, "But there are still some older wines in the cellar." "Why don't you like them, Grandpa?" "I like the freshness of the wines that have just been taken out of the cellar. After a while, I don't like them." Ian shook his head. "Speaking of which, the wine that Mr. Meg adds to the steak may be of better quality than the wine produced by the manor. It's just that he doesn't sell it to the public. He only uses it to make steak." Hill knew that Ian was a true wine lover. In order to drink wine that he liked, he was willing to spend decades, invest a lot of money, and put in a lot of effort to establish the best winery on the entire continent. He was the only one who could do something like that. "Really?" Ian stopped in his tracks. He didn't lose his composure even when he heard about the various magical things about the steam locomotive. Now, he was like a fighter who had his interest piqued. "The steak that he adds his own red wine tastes better than the best red wine from our manor. The wine aroma is also more intense." Hill nodded. "Interesting." Ian nodded with a smile and continued to walk forward. "City Lord, if Mr. Meg really does invent the steam engine and put it to use, it could change many things. Perhaps it could be an opportunity for the development of our Chaos City." In the City Lord's castle's office, Dicus looked at Michael, who had just returned, with an excited expression. Michael sat behind his desk with furrowed brows. After a long silence, he shook his head, and said, "Don't jump to conclusions before we see the actual product. However, if the Buffett family is willing to join us, they'll bear most of the risks." "Are we going to Amy's now?" Dicus was still very excited. He had been following the progress of the Hater team for the past few years, so he was well aware of the impact that the steam engine could have on this world. "Don't be in such a hurry. I still have 2 meetings to attend, so we'll go over tonight." Michael shook his head and walked toward the door. When he passed by Dikis, he stopped with a smile and said, "I know you're very excited, but don't tell Hader and the others about this, and don't let anyone else know about it." "Yes." Dikis was slightly taken aback, but he quickly nodded. Meg walked around the market, and he had a rough idea of what dishes were available, where they were, and what the quality of the dishes were. What a pity. With the cooking skills of this world, there probably aren't many people who can cook these dishes, Meg thought to herself. Meg thought to himself with a slightly wishful expression. He was a little dazzled by the variety of ingredients available, and at the same time, he was looking forward to creating new recipes using ingredients from this world after he had mastered the art of cooking. Have you seen a lobster the size of an adult before? I wonder if the spicy one or the garlic-flavored one tastes better, Meg murmured to himself. After settling down, he had already decided on all of the ingredients that he needed to buy. Seeing as the system had told him that he needed 3 dishes, he decided to make 3 dishes: spicy grilled fish, braised chicken and rice, and black pepper steak. The iridescent scale fish was a hybrid fish created by the system, and didn't exist in this world. Meg squatted in front of a seafood stall for half an hour before choosing a fish known as the Kirin grass carp. This type of fish had thick scales, and its flesh was very tender and delicious. The fish bones were quite large, and they were arranged in a regular pattern. As Meg watched the stall owner slaughter the fish, he had already come up with a plan to remove the bones. It should be enough to cook spicy grilled fish. Chapter 676. Boss, you really are a professional when it comes to choosing chickens. Meg gave the owner a thumbs up with an expression of admiration. You're far too kind, brother. If it weren't for you, I would have been in deep trouble. This is the leg of that chicken. It's the best chicken in this batch. Take it back and try it. Let's see if it's different from ordinary chickens. Mag nodded. Then, he handed Mag a turkey's drumstick. This is a drumstick from that chicken. It's the best chicken in this batch. You can try it and see if it's different from ordinary chickens. I'll take it back and have a taste. Meg hesitated momentarily before accepting the drumstick from the owner, who looked like he was going to kick up a fuss if he didn't accept the drumstick. That's the spirit. Remember to come find me again next time. I'll pick out the best chicken for you. The owner nodded with a meaningful expression. Thanks. Meg concluded this rather strange conversation with a smile. He had both the fish and the chicken, so Meg went to pick out some potatoes and other side dishes, all of which were the freshest in the entire market. Ironhide bowls weren't a common ingredient in the market, but Meg was quite lucky today. There just so happened to be 2 burly men selling ironhide bull beef at the meat stall, and they were almost out of stock. It appeared that they were selling very well. Come and have a look, everyone. This is beef from a 4th-tier magic beast, ironhide bull. 2 of our mercenary squad members were severely injured in order to capture this big guy. We risked our lives for this beef, so you won't be able to come across it on a regular basis, one of the burly men yelled with 2 scars running down his face. The other mercenary also had some wounds on his body, and they appeared to be new ones. It appeared that they had endured a difficult battle the day before, but they had still emerged victorious in the end. Meg looked at the 2 of them, and he couldn't help but recall the Rose mercenary squad that he had encountered when he was hunting ironhide bulls outside the city. Chiwil had sent someone to deliver the money from the ironhide bull to his shop, and he hadn't been seen since. He wondered how they were doing. He was willing to risk his life for an ironhide bull. As expected, being a mercenary really was a dangerous profession that required risking one's life for money. His words attracted the attention of many customers. 4th-level magical beasts were not commonly seen in the market. Although the price was not cheap, many customers still bought some with the mentality of trying something new. Meg made his way over to the meat stall, and his brows furrowed slightly as he turned toward the entrance of the market. At the same time, he said internally, "System, this ironhide bull beef is from yesterday, and the blood hasn't been completely drained yet, so it can only be considered low-quality beef. There's only one ironhide bull in the entire market, so just get them to prepare a fresh ironhide bull for me when we get to Rodu. Mission accomplished, right?" Ding. According to the system's analysis, the ingredients purchased by the system are of high quality. Seeing as the quality of the ironhide bull is too low and there is no room for selection, the system has deemed the mission a success. Ding. 0.5 physical strength has been issued. Does the host wish to activate it now? The system's voice rang out. I refuse. Meg refused without any hesitation. He didn't want to be struck by lightning in front of so many people, so he didn't want to be struck by lightning and become an idiot. With the addition of 0.5 physical strength, I'll have 4 physical strength points, which means I have the strength of a 4th tier knight. With Meg and Alex's swordsmanship, I'll be able to protect myself on the Norland continent. Meg thought to himself as he clenched his fists. From now on, he didn't have to hide behind Amy anymore. Instead, he could become Amy's protective umbrella. After exiting the market, Meg went straight back to the restaurant. It was already past 2 in the afternoon, so the restaurant was quite empty. Meg had just poured himself a glass of water when a knock sounded on the door. Meg put down the glass of water and opened the door to find Blower and Anna standing at the entrance. What are you two doing here? Meg asked with a smile. Blower had been bringing Anna over for meals quite often recently. The little girl was very obedient, and had become good friends with Amy. Meg was quite sympathetic toward her, but this wasn't the time for a meal. Meg looked at Meg with a resigned expression and said, "Mr. Mac, I have to go out for a while, so I can't take Anna with me. She doesn't want to stay at the Elven Embassy, so I could only send her to you. Would you be able to look after her for a few days? Uncle Meg, I want to learn how to cook from you. Can I?" Anna looked up at Meg with a determined expression. Meg looked at Anna, then at Blower. "That's not what I want. I want her to be a quiet little beauty." Blower shrugged. Meg looked at Anna again. She was still very young, but she was looking at Meg with a determined expression. Furthermore, there seemed to be a glimmer of light in her eyes. "Anna, do you really want to learn how to cook?" Meg looked at Anna with an equally serious expression. "Yes." Anna nodded with a serious expression without any hesitation. A smile appeared on Meg's face as he nodded and said, "All right. If you're willing, you can learn how to cook from me from today onward. As long as you're willing to learn, I'll continue to teach you how to cook." "Thank you, Uncle Meg." Anna spread open her arms and threw herself toward Meg. Meg squatted down and also gave Anna a gentle hug. He patted the sobbing little girl's back as he said in a gentle voice, "However, cooking is very difficult." Chapter 677. Meg and Anna sat with a glass of water between them, staring at each other in silence for more than 10 minutes. "Uncle Meg, are we going to start learning how to cook now?" Anna couldn't help but break the silence in a low voice. "Yes, learning how to cook is a gradual process. Anna has never learned before, so let's start with knife skills. This is a basic skill." Meg also came back to his senses. It was not an easy task to teach a 5 or 6-year-old girl who had never held a knife to cook. The difficulty level was much higher than teaching Yabamiya how to make ice cream. Okay. Anna stood up and nodded. Her eyes were filled with anticipation. "I hope this enthusiasm can be maintained for a long time." Meg thought to himself. Having enthusiasm was a good thing. After all, when he was chopping vegetables in the test field for the god of cookery, he almost went crazy. He deeply understood how boring it was to practice knife skills. System, give me a small apron and a set of small knives suitable for Anna, Meg said in his heart as he walked towards the kitchen. According to the system's judgment, the trainee is too young to be a chef. It is recommended that the host does not accept her as a disciple. The system's warning sounded. Then why did you choose a disabled person? Meg rolled his eyes. Although the host's body was disabled at that time, this body had great potential. That was why the system chose her, the system retorted. Now that I think Anna has great potential to become an excellent chef when she grows up, I want to teach her how to cook. There's nothing wrong with this logic, right? Meg said with a smile. The system fell into silence. Give me a price. I don't have time to dawdle with you, Meg interrupted the system's silence. A small apron and a set of scaled-down kitchen utensils. The total is 1,001 copper coins. In view of the host's good reputation, the system reluctantly erased the small change. The total is 1,000 copper coins. The system was silent for a while and said with a painful tone. Deal. Meg thought for a while and was too lazy to bargain. He directly nodded. Ding. 1,000 copper coins have been successfully deducted. The apron and kitchen utensils are in the process of being ordered. They will be delivered in 3 minutes. Host, please confirm the delivery location. Just put it on the counter. If there's another delivery error, I'll return it. Meg said coldly. This damn system, it was always careless when delivering items. Meg glanced around the kitchen. This was an adult's kitchen. The size of the kitchenware and the height of the stove were beyond Anna's reach. Then Meg's gaze fell on the small stool at the side, which was usually used by Amy to step on when she washed her hands. Since Anna wanted to learn how to cook and not play house, then it would be best not to make the kitchen into a DIY type, which would make it seem undignified and unserious. Therefore, he should let her adapt to the kitchen, not let the kitchen adapt to her. Anna, try this small stool and see how high it is when you stand on it. Meg turned around and waved at Anna, who was standing at the door. Anna obediently climbed onto the small stool. The little girl was about a head taller than Amy, so when she stood on the small stool, her hands were just above the height of the stove. Cutting vegetables was not a problem for her. Very good. From today onwards, this will be your workbench. Meg nodded with satisfaction. At least it was enough for the knife skills stage. Hearing the system's prompt, Meg smiled and said, Anna, come out with me. I have 2 small gifts for you. Okay. Anna curiously followed Meg out of the kitchen. Meg first took out a pink apron from the counter, accompanied by a pink hood. It's so beautiful. Anna's eyes lit up when she saw the apron in Meg's hand. There will be a lot of oil and smoke in the kitchen, so we need to wear an apron to prevent our clothes from being stained by oil. Anna, try it on and see if it fits. Meg smiled and helped Anna put on the apron. Anna was wearing a light blue dress today, which was very tight, so it was just right to put the apron on. Wearing the pink apron and her hair was wrapped in a pink hood, Anna stood there, just like a little cook. Well, it's really beautiful, and it fits you just right. Meg nodded with satisfaction. Thank you, Uncle Mag. Anna looked down at her little apron with a smile on her face. Other than the apron, I have a gift for you. Meg took out a dark brown wooden box from the counter, squatted in front of Anna again, and opened the lid. Wow! The shiny knives were a little dazzling, but Anna opened her eyes wide and stared at the knives in the box, which were slightly smaller than normal knives. Are these really for me? Anna raised her head and looked at Meg in disbelief. Of course. Having your own set of knives is the first step to becoming a chef. Meg nodded with a smile. Thank you, thank you. Anna's eyes turned red immediately, and she bowed deeply to Meg. I'm super strict when it comes to cooking. You'll probably think I'm despicable in the future. Meg smiled and rubbed the little girl's hair. The little girl was so sensible that it made people feel sorry for her. No, I'll definitely learn to cook well. Anna shook her head seriously, holding the box of knives in her arms. Then let's start with knife skills. The so-called knife skills are to use a knife to process the ingredients into the desired shape. For example, when cooking Yangzhou fried rice, you need to cut all the ingredients into the size of rice grains. Meg opened the refrigerator, looked at Anna, and then closed it again. He took 2 potatoes that he had bought from the market today from the counter. After washing them, he placed one in front of Anna and the other on the chopping board in front of him. He pulled out the gold-rimmed kitchen knife from the knife rack and said with a serious expression, "Now, let's cut this potato into the size of a grain of rice." How should I do it? Anna stood on the small stool and looked at Meg attentively. How could such a big round potato be cut into the size of rice grains? It was unbelievable. Watch carefully. Meg reminded her. The kitchen knife fell, and a thin potato slice was cut off. Then, the second and third slices fell, and the potato slices of uniform thickness were cut out as if they had been measured with a ruler. The kitchen knife made steady and even sounds on the chopping board. The speed was not fast, but it made people feel steady and comfortable. Soon, the potato slices turned into thin filaments, and then into golden granules the size of rice grains. Wow, so awesome! Chapter 678. Young Master, you shouldn't go back on this trip. At the back gate of the Elven Embassy, Ingve looked at the beautiful young woman on horseback with a concerned expression. Isn't young Master Blower still in the embassy? Blower looked at Ingve with a relaxed smile and said, I'm just going back, so I might not do anything. Perhaps I won't even run into them, so you don't have to worry. Young Master, if your identity is exposed, not only will those villains not spare you, but there will also be many people in the elven race who will want your life. That would be very detrimental to our Billy family. Ingve still wore a concerned expression. Don't worry, even if I die, I won't drag the entire family down with me. Let's go. Blower raised a hand and urged his horse to gallop away. Sigh. Ingve stood at the door for a long time before heaving a faint sigh. If I were 300 years younger, perhaps I would have accompanied young Master Blower on this trip. Receiving praise for his delicious dishes was already a common occurrence for Meg. However, very few people were able to appreciate or praise his culinary prowess. Therefore, the little lowly Anna looked at him with a face full of admiration. Her gaze and words did not hide her admiration for him at all, making him feel as if he was floating. Even the kitchen knife in his hand unconsciously became lighter. He withdrew his cleaver, and the large round potato had been reduced to a pile of rice-sized potato kernels, all of which were very evenly distributed. Anna, practice cutting potatoes into kernels during this period of time. Once you're able to achieve the same size, you'll be able to master the first stage of your cutting techniques, Meg instructed as he looked at the Reverend Amy. Okay, Wang Yao said. Anna nodded obediently before pulling out a small Chinese cleaver from the box. She pressed her little hand against the round potato before carefully placing the cleaver over it. As soon as she applied some force, the potato slid away from her little hand and rolled into the nearby sink. Oh! Anna was stunned for a moment. She quickly got down from the stool and tiptoed to pick up the potato. She pressed it on the chopping board and continued to slice it. Meg stood to the side and watched for a while. He did not give her any advice, nor did he step forward to teach her. For a pure newbie, it would be better to give her some time to figure things out on her own. It would not make the process too boring. Moreover, the little girl's strength and hands-on ability were somewhat beyond his expectations. Ordinary human children would have a hard time holding a knife when they were 4 or 5 years old, but Anna seemed to be quite relaxed when holding a knife. Her actions of cutting vegetables were also quite decent, but she was still trying to figure out the correct method. With the experience of traveling outside for a long time and the bonus of an elf's physique, learning some simple dishes shouldn't be a problem. Meg nodded with satisfaction. He withdrew his gaze and began to prepare the ingredients for the dinner service. He had taken the afternoon off, so the customers were most likely going to be very disgruntled. For over 2 hours, Meg prepared the ingredients while Anna stood on the stool and continued to slice potatoes. There was already a small mountain of potatoes on a large plate beside her. They were of different sizes, but from the bottom to the top, the potatoes were gradually becoming more uniform. Even though there were still some differences in shape, the improvement was quite obvious. Anna is so awesome. She's been slicing for an entire afternoon, and she's still persisting, Yabamiya said with admiration as she stood at the entrance of the kitchen. Indeed. If it were me, I'd probably be done before I even finished slicing a single potato. Barbara also nodded. This little girl's small body seemed to contain a lot of energy. In contrast, a gratified smile appeared on Sally's face. Her boss was a very kind person, and if Anna could continue to learn cooking from him, she would definitely become an exceptional chef in the future. Furthermore, with a recognized identity in Chaos City, she wouldn't have to worry about being taken back to the city. Meg took a look at the pile of potatoes, and nodded. It was quite a shame to say that Anna's current cooking skills had already far exceeded his cooking skills in his past life. Perhaps this was what it meant to be a so-called aptitude. Father, I'm back. A knock on the door, and Amy's voice sounded from outside. Ugly Duckling, which had been sleeping on the counter, immediately opened its eyes. It slid down the counter leg, and ran toward the door. Yabamiya opened the door, and Amy skipped in. She kicked away the excited Ugly Duckling. Meow! Ugly Duckling rolled back a couple of times before sitting down on the ground. It looked up at Amy with a resentful expression. Be careful next time, Ugly Duckling. Amy gave Ugly Duckling a warning before bidding farewell to Yabamiya and the others. She then continued skipping toward the kitchen. Ha! Big Sister Anna. What are you doing here? Amy made her way to the door, and a hint of surprise appeared on her face at the sight of Anna. Her gaze fell on the little apron that she was wearing, and the kitchen knife that she was holding. Amy, Anna is. Meg looked at Amy, and thought about how he should explain this. He was a little worried that Amy would be upset by him teaching Anna how to cook. After all, he was her only family member. Oh. I know. Big Sister Anna must be here to learn cooking from Father. Before Mag could finish, Amy's eyes had already lit up, and she asked happily, Yes, yes? Yes, yes. Amy, from today onward, I'm going to learn cooking from Uncle Meg. After I learn how to cook, I'll cook for you. Anna turned around to look at Amy with a serious expression on her little face. Yay, yay. Not only will Father be able to cook for me in the future, but Big Sister Anna will also be able to cook for me. This is so blissful. Amy nodded with elation as she skipped into the kitchen. She looked at the potatoes and all kinds of small knives in front of Anna with curiosity in her eyes. Meg raised an eyebrow. It appeared that he was overthinking things. During this period of time, the friendship between the two of them had progressed by leaps and bounds, so they didn't care about this issue at all. Amy, do you want to learn how to cook with me? Cooking is very interesting. Anna looked at Amy, who was full of curiosity, and asked. Meg also looked at Amy when he heard this. Of course, he had also considered the idea of his daughter taking over his father's business. However, all this time, Amy was more interested in eating than cooking, so he didn't mention this matter much. It was best to let his child do what she liked. I feel that since you and father are both cooking, if I also cook, then no one will be responsible for eating. It's not right to waste food like this, so I've decided not to learn how to cook. I'll be responsible for eating. Amy shook her head firmly. Chapter 679. Sure enough, little foodies can always persuade people with strange reasons. Meg shook his head with a smile. He looked at the time and said, "Okay, Anna's study is over for today. Go play with Amy. I'll call you for lunch later." Anna will be staying with us for a few days from today. Take her upstairs to familiarize herself with the environment, Meg said to Amy. Really? That's great. Amy's eyes lit up. She grabbed Anna's hand, who had just put down the knife, and walked out happily. Big sister Anna, I'll take you to the playground, and then I'll take you to my little bed to sleep. Meg looked at the two little girls disappearing at the door with a gentle smile. It was undoubtedly good news for him that the two little girls could get along well with each other. After dinner, Amy took Anna to the square to play, and the restaurant entered its busiest night. "Mr. Mac, you asked for leave at noon without warning. I've been hungry for the whole afternoon. I can only order a bowl of Yangzhou fried rice to comfort myself tonight." "That's right. It wasn't easy for me to apply for leave to come here this afternoon, but I was given the cold shoulder in the end. Boss Mag, your leave is a huge loss to us. I'm so glad that I didn't come at noon. Give me 2 steaks, one medium well, and the other medium well. Give me the medium well one first." The moment the customers entered the restaurant, they all began to complain about Meg's leave at noon. They all seemed to be very resentful. Meg, however, just laughed it off. He only asked for leave at noon. When he went to Rodu in a few days, who knew how many days he would be absent from work? He had to be mentally prepared. Customers came and went in the restaurant, and the long line gradually shortened. The restaurant's business was booming. An antiquated horse-drawn carriage stopped in front of the restaurant, and Ian raised a corner of the curtain. A smile appeared on his face as he looked at the extremely popular restaurant, and he said, "I love restaurants like this. If there aren't any customers, then it's not even worth trying. Master, we might have to line up now. Do you need me to inform the restaurant to clear the area?" A middle-aged man who looked like a butler stood beside the carriage and said softly, "I'm not the king, so why do I have to clear the field for a meal? Brooker, do you have to change that habit of yours?" Ian chuckled as he got off the carriage and walked towards the entrance of the restaurant. There were still some customers waiting in line. "Yes." Brooker nodded before quickly opening the door of the restaurant. As soon as the door opened, a delicious aroma wafted out, causing Ian's eyes to light up. Compared to the crowded restaurant on the outside, it was surprisingly quiet inside. The seated guests were completely immersed in the delicious food in front of them. Occasionally, they could not help but exclaim in admiration. The customers in line also stood in silence, waiting for an empty seat to appear. Even if they were to speak, they would do their best to keep their voices down so that they wouldn't disturb the other customers. The elegant decor and the perfect amount of space between the tables created a very comfortable environment for dining. Ian looked around the restaurant, and he nodded slightly. Regardless of how the dishes tasted, this restaurant had already achieved a level of comfort for its customers. This was the foundation for a restaurant's popularity. Of course, the fact that elves and orcs were able to dine at the same table was a testament to just how magical the food in this restaurant was to be able to temporarily set aside their animosity toward one another. "There are seats available over here, please take a seat." Ian waited for a while, and several tables of customers finished their meals almost at the same time. Yabamiya led Ian and Brooker to a nearby table with a smile. "Have a seat, Brooke." Ian gestured for Brooke to sit down with his hands clasped behind his back. "I'll just stand beside you and wait on you, master." Brooker lowered his head slightly. "I'm not at the stage where I need someone to wait on me while I eat," Ian replied with a smile. Brooker hesitated momentarily before taking a seat across from Ian. Half of his backside was on the chair, and he was in a state of readiness. "Here's the menu, you can take a look at what you'd like to eat." Yabamiya handed over the menu to Ian with a smile. This white-bearded elderly man appeared to be quite interesting, and it appeared that he was quite a lofty figure. "Let me take a look." Ian opened the menu, and his eyes lit up at the sight of a series of intricate images on the menu. This menu was completely different from other menus that only had the names of the dishes and text introductions. The images on the menu were as if they were real, and the delectable dishes were so delicious that one couldn't help but want to try them. The names of the dishes, the images, and the prices were all very clear, and it was a lot more intuitive than those long paragraphs of text introductions. The fact that the customers are still lining up to dine in a restaurant of this scale indicates that the owner is quite capable. Ian swept his gaze over the prices of the dishes, and nodded with approval. "I'd like a black pepper steak and a savory tofu pudding." Ian closed the menu before handing it over to Brooker, and said, "Brooker, you can choose for yourself." Brooker flipped open the menu, and a hint of surprise appeared on his face at the sight of the prices. He hesitated momentarily before replying, I'd like a Yangzhou fried rice and a sweet tofu pudding." Yabamiya looked at Ian with a smile, and asked, "All right, sir. May I know how you'd like your steak? How would you like it done for an old man like me?" Ian turned to Yabamiya with a smile. "You look like you're in high spirits, so I'm sure your teeth are still in good shape. A medium-well steak will be slightly more tender, a medium-well steak will be slightly firmer, and a medium-well steak will be slightly more spicy. You can choose according to your preferences," Yabamiya replied with a smile. "Then I'll have a medium-well steak. I like things that are a little chewy." Ian nodded. "All right, please wait for a moment." Yabamiya nodded before quickly making his way to the kitchen. Jeffrey's rules are so fucked up. The half-dragon waitresses are far superior to normal waitresses, and those discriminatory rules should have been changed a long time ago, Ian thought to himself as he looked at Yabamiya's departing figure. "But I don't think there's any wine in this world that's better than my wineries, right?" Ian murmured to himself with furrowed brows. "Your black pepper steak, medium well." You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.